Invite guests in.
First time I've been down here in years.
Here it is.
It's phenomenal what's going on in here.
Amazing. Absolutely amazing. See that committee's on down there, the last election committee's on down there. See a big table.
Yeah.
Exhibition centre down
Yes,
there.
it's the first I've seen that. I've heard about it. But
Okay, you're all very welcome. Just to remind people in the gallery that if they would put their phones on silent or make sure that they don't interfere with the meeting or airplane mode. Agenda item 2 is apologies. We have an apology from Mervyn Story. I think from looking around everybody else is here, so I'm assuming that's it. The draft minutes are in agenda item 3. The copy is in page 7 in your pack. Are members content that they're an accurate account of the meeting? Great. Okay, this is the agenda item 4 is the revised agenda.
Sorry, Chair. I just noticed Southern Regional College. Could I have that amendment? Southeastern. Sorry, Chair.
Okay, that's an amendment to the minutes.
Yeah,
Southeastern College rather than
Southern Regional. Southern.
Okay.
Thank you.
Item 4, it's a revised agenda. This is the issue we've been briefly chatting about. We've had the revised agenda has been tabled in hard copy for the members to include the SL1 and the SR. They're at item 4. Are members content to agree the revised agenda?
Great.
You want to register?
Please, yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
we can register. We can record that in the minutes. Okay, fair enough. And the next item is to have a brief presentation from Catalyst Inc. The clerk's memo is at page 14, and the press release for Catalyst Inc. is at page 3 in our table papers. We were emailed the press release on Monday. And correspondence from Catalyst Inc. regarding its launch is at table 5 of the table papers. Page 5, sorry, of the table papers. So I'd like to thank Norman Apsley and Joanne Stewart for hosting us today and invite them just to make some introductory remarks.
Well, thank you very much, Chairman, and ladies and gentlemen, you're all very welcome to Catalyst Inc. I have to get used to saying it. Everybody's better at it than I am, I'm afraid, so I may slip back. But I thought maybe, it's probably self-evident, we are all the same people, the same places, and the name is just to reinforce what we intend to do and what we have, and to report what we have done. I know some of you have been here before, indeed in this committee, but some are new, so with your permission, I thought I'd give you a very potted history of how we got here, and then ultimately why we changed the name.
Okay.
Basically, what was initially the Northern Ireland Science Park was founded by the forerunner of the department, the DED, back in the aftermath of the Good Friday Agreement. And it was a project that started, or at least it was announced or prompted by Gordon Brown, but was picked up enthusiastically locally. The company was formed in '99, and then we had the first tranche of monies arranged and all the administration done by 2002. So in 2004 or so, this building opened. Shortly afterwards, ESIT was developed on site by Queen's University. And that combination has been critical to our success. Between that date and 2008, when the world changed, we got a good deal of the rest of the buildings, White Star House, Legacy Building, and the first of the concourses were put up. The concourse 1 was the one we began to borrow private money alongside the initial soft loan from the department. Then in 2008, the world changed, the banking collapsed, the property collapsed, and we had to revise our model. We took stock, and at that time inherited a couple of programs from out of the demise of Investment Belfast. Basically, the Board of Investment Belfast passed those IP, elements of IP and resources in programs that were connected with business angels and with helping young entrepreneurs. We know those programs today as Halo and Connect, and we took them on, and in that hiatus time, developed them. We were extremely lucky, if you like, then. So what we had done effectively was taken the rules of international science parks, added to it the rules of international business angels, and the greatest fortune came from a young man who I'm sure you all know, Steve Orr, who had left our shores some years before and had become successful in California, in San Diego. And after his second success, he came under the wing of Mary Walshock, who founded the Connect movement, was personally trained by her, and it brought her ideas, which are reported by the likes of Michael Porter and others as the way to establish a community of entrepreneurship. So we had those three elements. We brought them together in the bad days of 2008, 2009. And then we got our building initiatives back again with help from the Harbour. So Concourse 2 was put up with the Harbour, and with Interreg support, we began to get our first building in Derry. So lastly, with the department's help and from what was then DFP, we got FTC money, and you can see the results of that, and you'll see it directly as we have launched. That's Concourse 3. So that actually builds us. It's 2016. In 2002, we set off on a 20-year mission to build 400,000 feet. 400,000 feet is what we have today, fully let, fully occupied. Concourse 3 will be, and yesterday's announcement from Philips buying one of the companies, one of the Queen's companies, that they'll tell you more about, I'm sure. But this is big news, and Concourse today will be a flagship for Concourse 3. We've been sitting on that news for some weeks and itching to get it out. It's really, really big news for Connected Health. And so that's the model of what we do. In numbers, the department gave us over time about 20 million. We levered it with a further 20, but our assets are worth about 50. We take that model of 50 million and we turn it into about 5 million a year, of which we make £1 million of surplus, and that surplus is then invested in programs. And the programs are then again levered by the private sector. So we have hundreds of volunteers, and we get about a 5-to-1 ratio in effort and some money. And that's what then builds the community. And that then is what you see today. We changed name because, as I said, I was very happy to borrow all the learning from the International Science Park movement. And indeed, the definitions are deeply embedded into our structure. But actually, we have become a leader in the International Science Park movement. The connection that we have with our community is a matter of some envy for many science parks across both these islands and also wider in Europe and abroad. And so we began a year ago. We saw we had three imperatives a year ago, was to decide. Well, we had to correct some of our funding. Our funding had been a bit of a hodgepodge, short-term and with no longevity to it. And Dick Milligan, as our new chairman and as an ex-banker, was always unhappy about that. So he set his mind to that. At the same time, we decided we needed to look at our brand, if you like, and we had built up a range of maybe a dozen programs, each separately branded, and was that right? And then out of that to build a new set of goals. So I can very happy to announce you today that we solved the long-term funding. Basically, what we have today and what we stand up in is now secure for the 20-year. We have 20-year funding for everything that we do. So we either own the assets already or are on process to own it, or in the case of Concourse 2, we have a long-term lease negotiated with the Harbour. So we are safe and secure as any business. Clearly, if the world turns over and everybody falls away, we're stuck like anybody. But in terms of what we have, we hold. When we set to do the branding, we got some brilliant results, I have to say, and some of them really made me feel extremely proud. Things like our integrity, our passion, and our effectiveness, if you like, came up very high. What was very poor was the perception of these dozen programs and the property and everything else. It looked like a mess. And people who touched one bit couldn't see they were dealing with the whole thing. So the branders who did the work for us, it's a local company made by Mint, where we gave them the power that having made this independent audit, they got the power to come up with a set of concepts that would pull it all together. Catalyst Inc. is the result. Catalyst is a word from chemistry that says it's a material which accelerates a reaction between other bodies but doesn't get consumed in the process. And that's what we do. The property allows us that longevity to do the programmatic work that we do, which is where we pull things together. In a sense, we are a network, and we are as much, that's a big statement, but it's also a simple one. Our networks are open to all, and it's fueled by the long-term property. And then Inc. is a statement of internationality, but it's also a statement of inclusiveness. When we started this process, the mission was clear. We were here, our economy in 2000 couldn't absorb more than 50 engineers produced by the universities. So they produced 250 each. Together they produced 250, and 200 of them had to go either elsewhere to be an engineer or do something else. And today, as you know, in our last measurement of the knowledge economy, 1 in 10 jobs are knowledge-based jobs. Engineering is spreading throughout all the sectors. I work with the Royal Academy, and we publish that, and the Irish Academy, the same. So then, basically, but 1 in 10 is not enough. Okay, 1 in 10 is still not balanced. It's either going to have to be 3 in 10 or 5 in 10. Somewhere in there is where we will hit a balance. And so collectively we decided that we would, and we were encouraged by our stakeholders to set our ambition. So that's what you saw the other day, that we think another 100 million, growing the campus by a factor of 3, growing the internal jobs in the science park by a factor of 3, but all to spread the influence both throughout the north of Ireland, if I could put it that way, because through the Interreg, and apologies, I forgot to mention in passing, we got our, I find the most exciting project is in, Derry, Londonderry, Letterkenny. Basically, the two connected innovation centres there are one of the most, I think, important things that we did, because everybody said it wouldn't work, but it has worked a treat. And we are now central to building parts of the economy and thoughts for what the economy should do up there, and we have programs going at the moment. And indeed, we have bids into the Interreg for Interreg 5 of some magnitude, done and funded by Derry City Council to go forward. So, ladies and gentlemen, that's my opening remarks, and I'd be very happy to take questions.
Okay, well, can I just ask the members to hold their questions, because we have a tight schedule. There will be an opportunity at lunchtime for a bit of networking discussion. Sure. So if I know what you present is very interesting, and it probably will provoke quite a lot of questions, but if we could do that informally at lunchtime, it would be better. We are against the clock a little bit, and we've got additional items to deal with as well, which was unexpected.
Just one thing through the chair. First of all, congratulations. Well done. You've done a cracking job, and well done on Catalyst. And I'm sure we would like to pass on our thanks and best hopes for the future.
Well, thank you very much.
Well, and our presence here is a signal that we are very interested and supportive of what you're doing here. But anyway, we'll get an opportunity to discuss that out in a fuller sense over the lunchtime.
And we'll have a number of tenants at the lunch as well, so we'll give you a chance to talk to some of the tenants.
Yes, we should say that the true stories with the tenants, that do talk to them,
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you. Another issue in relation to the National House Building Council requesting the committee sponsor a roundtable discussion on Wednesday the 19th of October. Peter, do you want to just speak to that?
Chair, at 4.2, which is page 15 in members' packs, there's an email from Chambray Public Affairs, but it's on behalf of the NHBC, the National House Building Council. They're really wanting the committee to sponsor a roundtable discussion that looks at how the skills gap in construction can be tackled. Really, it would be a series of tables over lunch. There would be discussion. You're being asked to chair it, but there'd be MLA representatives at each table who would chair those tables and then draw back the discussion towards the end. We've provisionally looked at a date of Wednesday the 19th of October, so it would actually flow from a committee meeting into a lunch where the discussion would take place. We put a provisional booking on 115 in case the committee were happy to go ahead with it. So really what we're looking for is, if members are content, we will go ahead and organise that and provide more details as we get that done.
Okay, members agreed. It's the 19th of October.
Yeah.
Great.
Thank you. Item 5 is the briefing from Queen's University. The clerk's memo is at page 17. It highlights the issues raised by the research paper which follows it. Members may find it useful for both the university briefings, because we'll have UU subsequent to this. The Assembly research paper is at page 22, which highlights the fund and other issues the universities face. The Queen's University Economic Impact Reports at page 61. This is a Universities UK paper and assesses the important economic impact the Queen's has had locally and highlights the benefits that a university can bring to the area in which it is based. And the Foundation Stone briefing is at page 87, and this highlights the laying earlier this month the Foundation Stone for the new School of Biological Sciences. The life sciences sector makes an important contribution to the economy here. So those are some of the background papers which members would have had in their packs. And there's a briefing paper from Queen's which has been tabled this morning for people. It's here. And the representatives we have are Professor Patrick Johnson, the President and Vice Chancellor, James O'Kane is the Registrar and Chief Operating Officer, and Wendy Galbraith is the Director of Finance. You're very welcome to the meeting, and thanks for coming along. I just invite you to make some opening remarks, and then we can have some questions from the members.
Well, thank you very much, Chair, and it's a real pleasure to be with the committee and to be invited to speak to the committee. We've given you just a very brief presentation of our initial opening comments. I'm beginning with the fact that we very much welcome the Programme for Government Framework and indeed the 14 outcomes that have been highlighted as part of that. And as a world-class university, we really feel we have a major role to play along with you in every single one of these, and in particular in giving our children and young people the best start in life and helping them and us develop a very prosperous society. Indeed, the mission of the university, which is on the next page, it's entitled Vision 2020. The mission of the university is about being world-class, based here in Northern Ireland, having outstanding students and staff working in outstanding world-class facilities. But the important part of the mission statement is being very much focused on the needs of society. And that's what Queen's is all about. It's actually about looking at what society needs, both now and indeed well into the future. The next slide actually just highlights some of the key statistics of the institution and important statistics. First of all, we have close to 24,000 students currently enrolled in the university. We're in contact right across the world with 132,000 of our graduates as we speak, and they contribute to society here, but also right around the world. The university contributes close to £1 billion to our local economy each year. And that's not our numbers, that's University UK numbers. We also contribute over 10,650 jobs, and close to 7,000 of those are indirect jobs, so not employed at the university, into our economy. And we also are the number one university in the UK for knowledge transfer partnerships. We have created 313 of those, with creating careers for over 400 graduates and millions of pounds in profit for the companies that we've actually worked closely with. The next slide actually shows the profile of our graduates coming out each year, so a total of 6,871, the majority being undergraduate, 4,455, over 2,000 postgraduate taught qualifying each year, and close to 350 researchers also qualifying each year. So a very significant number of graduates coming into our economy from Queen's each year and into leadership in our society, or the potential for that. The next slide actually talks to the importance of having a world-class institution and our standing as a Russell Group university, one of the research-intensive universities of the UK. and highlights some of the real quality of the institution. First of all, the top 1% of universities in the world, in the top 200. Currently, the first place in the UK for generating revenues from intellectual property, ahead of Cambridge, Oxford, Imperial and UCL, and significantly ahead. 8th in the UK for research intensity, 9th in the world for international research collaborations, first, as I've already said, for knowledge transfer. And just recently, in February, we received our 6th Queen's Anniversary Prize for Higher and Further Education for the work going on in our Centre for Secure Information Technology, which is just right here, one of the founding members in the Science Park, as the university is. And also then, just 2 weeks ago, we received from Her Majesty the Queen the first Regis Professorship ever to Queen's and ever to Northern Ireland. There are very few of these ever given out, and so we were absolutely delighted that the university was bestowed this honour for its exceptional quality research in electronic engineering and IT. So that's a real accolade. But more importantly is the global impact and the impact of the university. And so over the last 18 months, we've been doing a very challenging exercise inside the university in looking at what are the major global challenges for our society and also for the rest of the world, and how do we align with these, and indeed how do we actually begin to deliver on some of these. And we have done that with international partners, and as a result formed 4 global research institutes and 6 pioneer research programs. They have been informed and formed as a result of international peer review. So in other words, international peers saying that the work going on at Queen's is world class, there is a critical mass here, we are already working with you, and we want to continue to do that. And those are very high benchmarks for people to actually reach. It's been very deliberate, and it's been very challenging for the university to do this internally, but we actually have absolutely committed to it. The first 4 global research institutes are outlined in this slide. The Institute for Electronic Communication Information Technology, which deals with everything from data analytics through to cybersecurity to digital futures and digital society. And of course, as I've already said, as founder members of the Science Park, we're actually thinking of expanding the whole operation down here. We have 2 buildings just a stone's throw from here, which contribute very significantly to the Science Park and to what the university does. The second one to highlight is the Senator George J. Mitchell Institute for Global Peace, Security and Justice. And indeed, I'm delighted to say Senator Mitchell will be here on Friday to have the official opening of that. And this is the only entity he has given his name to from a research point of view, and he did it after a lot of deliberation. One of the things that he demanded from us is that this institute must impact societies across the world. And that is something, he actually put that in a letter to me if I'm going to give my name to it. The slide goes on to talk about the type of work that they do, not just here, but actually in the Middle East and Southeast Asia and in Africa, working with societies there. The other one, Institute for Global Food Security, as some of you will know, led by Chris Elliott, who led the horse meat scandal. We work with food companies, both here in Northern Ireland, but actually right across the globe now, as far away as China and indeed North America. Basically working to make food much safer, to ensure its safety, but also now trying to move from farm all the way to human. And that will be a very unique institute when it finally comes to pass. Then the final one, Institute for Health Sciences, tackles areas such as cancer, diabetes, respiratory medicine, and also global health. And you all know the impact that the Cancer Centre and the Cancer Research Centre has had, just as one example, in terms of improving outcomes for patients here in Northern Ireland. The 6 pioneer research programmes also went through exactly the same form of very rigorous peer review before being accepted, and they're outlined here. They go from everything from energy and green chemistry to smart manufacturing systems in terms of how factories work more efficiently, to risk and social inequality, particularly around financial systems, early intervention and prevention, preventing social problems. That's largely focused around early intervention with education and with social housing and that sort of thing. Advanced technologies is about drug delivery and improving medicines, and then the Advanced Centre for Radiation Research focuses on radiation science and nuclear type research in that area. All of that actually brought together really highlights the fact that the impact of Queen's is not just about research, but actually it's about translating that research into impact for society. And it makes us a powerhouse of innovation and creativity, as this next slide shows. We are, as I've already said, the highest performing university in the UK for revenue generation from intellectual property. We have still active 47 spin-out companies. There have been over 70 spin-out companies from Queen's. 1,700 jobs created with close to a 200 million turnover, external investment coming in of 75 million. And some of the companies that we have spun out, you'll have heard about PathXL being bought up by Philips this morning. I'm going to point to two others quickly, Kainos Group and Andor Technology. We've only had 4 companies that have ever been publicly listed in Northern Ireland, and 2 of those, Andor and Kainos, actually are spin-outs from Queen's. So it does give you an idea of the real impact. The next slide, however, points to the real challenge that we currently have, and the real challenge is global competitiveness. The higher education, further education market is a globally competitive market. And this is data from University UK, published back in March 2015. And you can see that we have now begun to diverge significantly in terms of our level of investment in higher education from both Scotland and England, very significantly. We literally, from 2009 through to 2014-15, we had a decrease in funding of 24% in real terms. What that means is we went from 214 million down to 185 million in terms of investment in our university sector over that period of time. On top of that, and not shown on this graph, there was a further 16.1 million reduction in 15-16. And what has then resulted as a result of that is that we have, as of last year, both universities have lost 2,260 student positions. In that period of time, Scotland has grown by 2%, and in that time, England has grown by 10%. So this graph, if we had it updated, would look a hell of a lot worse than it currently is. Now, the immediate impact of that for Northern Ireland has been the following, shown very clearly on this graph, is over the last 2 years, we have initially had a 32% exodus to elsewhere for university positions, and that has now, over the last year and a half, gone up to 37%, as shown here. And you can just see, I'll just highlight the fact that a total number of additional 530 student places have now gone elsewhere, particularly to England. We're the only region of the UK that's exporting our best talent base, and we are losing our best talent. Let's be absolutely clear. Less than a third ever come back. This is not sustainable, and we are actually hitting a danger zone in terms of our competitivity with the rest of the UK, let alone globally. So that's the real challenge that we all have. Widening participation, I just want to highlight quickly because it's a major priority for the institution. And as a Russell Group University, we're very proud of the fact that we're top in that for our participation in widening participation. 32% of our first degree graduates coming in, or entrants coming in, are from lower socioeconomic groups, SE groups 4 through 7. That's significantly ahead of our benchmark, and we want to go even further with that. We have a number of new initiatives which I'll be happy to talk about. Importantly, 94% of our graduates are in employment or further study 6 months after graduating from Queen's, which is a really, really good statistic for us, something we're proud of and something we want to further improve on. But most importantly, 80 of the top 100 companies in Northern Ireland have leadership positions, graduates from Queen's in senior leadership positions in those companies here in Northern Ireland, pointing to the impact of our graduates across the economy and across our society here. So in closing, we very much want to work in partnership with the executive and indeed with the business and community sector in Northern Ireland to create a very vibrant partnership. We wish the programme for government to be successful. We're very excited by that, and that partnership approach is going to be absolutely vital. Without investment, of course, we will not achieve a vital knowledge-based economy to allow us to grow. We believe that the university is very relevant to all 14 outcomes, both from what it does from research, education and innovation, commercial spin-outs, the staff and what they contribute, the international reputation and impact of the institution, particularly in terms of foreign direct investment and its success, and of course, most importantly, our students as graduates, as tomorrow's leaders. Thank you very much for listening.
Okay, thank you very much for that, and congratulations on the awards that you have received. It's a very interesting presentation. Obviously, the funding situation, and I think there is a general acceptance that the university's got a significant hit over the last number of years, and it seems to be, the programme for government, obviously the budget associated has to be worked out, but seems to be a desire to try and remedy that in some shape as best can be, obviously with competing priorities within the executive. What is the funding gap? What's the figure that's needed to sustain the type of output that you're looking for going forward? And just a secondary question, I mean, you've spoken, I think, in the past, or it's in some of the papers, about trying to grow the postgraduate section. Is that at the expense of the undergraduate section, and does that have an impact on widening participation and some of the figures that you quite rightly are proud of in terms of people from a lower socioeconomic background? Does that have an impact on that if you start to put a greater focus on postgrad rather than undergrad?
Well, first of all, the gap that exists currently is 55 million. That's the actual infrastructural gap in.
That's for Queen's or for universities?
For universities in general.
Right.
And that's where the real challenge is in trying to make up that gap. And that gap has become manifest, in the way that I've outlined, particularly over the last 5 years. And it will grow further because of other things that are happening in the sector more broadly. So there is, as you've outlined, a real challenge there. If we address that, the university will play a full part in ensuring that we actually redress some of the exodus that I've highlighted in a very significant way. And we will grow undergraduate numbers because we will be enabled to do so. In relationship to the question around postgraduate numbers, no, there is no attempt to actually increase postgraduate numbers at the expense of undergraduate numbers. We have largely been fishing in a Northern Ireland pool, possibly UK-Ireland pool for postgraduates. We need to see that more broadly and link that to the international impact and international agenda. So the international agenda of doubling the number of international students coming to Queen's is very much linked also to the postgraduate strategy, is very much linked to research impact and impact with industry and indeed with communities across the world, and in particular in areas like Southeast Asia, North America and China, where we're already visible and actually working. So no, there's no attempt or desire to actually negatively impact, indeed very much the opposite. When you have a vibrant postgraduate community, you positively impact the undergraduate programs as well.
Okay. Just one question, just for the record. The exodus you speak about, and it may well have increased in recent years due to a lack of funding, but I mean, there always has been an exodus from here to universities in Britain and in the south. Perhaps not in the same numbers southwards in recent years, and regardless of the funding situation of the universities, that's always been the case going back generations. And so, is there an accurate figure as to what increase there has been as a consequence of particularly difficult funding situation over the last number of years? How has that impacted in terms of an added number going outside of Ireland for education?
The closest that we can give is actually the 32% going to 37% in terms of recent times. It's directly linked to the funding decrease and the number of student places. But you're right to point to the fact that we are underfunded in terms of student places currently. I do think that this is a discussion we have to have more broadly. Can we afford to be losing 32% where less than a third ever come back, and particularly the most talented group of students at 18 leaving? I'm not against, indeed I'm a product of someone who has left myself, so I'm very much in favour of people coming back. But the reason they don't come back is actually that we do not have the job opportunities to attract people, particularly in their late 20s and mid-30s, who are looking for more senior career development type jobs and leadership positions. So the people who do come back are actually coming back pretty much immediately after they've done their undergraduate programs, rather than when they're in their mid-30s, when they have families and other issues to deal with. So, and I think that's one of the issues we've got to look at.
So it's a combination of creating more places, because you don't have necessarily, you'd like to get back to where you were, but expansion plans, if you were to take that 32% down, regardless of the addition of numbers over the last number of years. I mean, there aren't the places here, and that would require much more significant investment to deal with that. But I suppose your point is that it's not necessarily a bad thing. Some of them go away as long as we have the jobs for people to come back to.
And I think the two things are linked, because right now we have a 2,000 jobs deficit in terms of our current companies and what they're looking for, particularly in the IT sector, but also in other sectors as well. So we're starting from a very low base. It's not like we're starting from a place where things are comfortable. Companies today are knocking on our door saying, Queens, why aren't you educating more students? And I have to explain, well, I can't. I don't have the funding to do that. So we already have a significant deficit in our economy in terms of students and graduates who could be getting jobs tomorrow if those graduates were coming out the door. If we want to grow further as a society, and I know we all do, we have to actually take a much more comprehensive look at how we educate society, not just in universities, but actually even before that, but particularly in the university sector, where we're trying to retain the talent base. We have to. That's where the importance of having a global, world-class institution comes in. You want to retain that world-class talent. You also want to give it opportunities to go away and come back, possibly in a more structured way. So those are the sorts of things we need to talk about carefully.
Okay, thank you. A number of speakers. Steve, first.
First of all, I need to declare an interest as an ex-CEO at a major university in Dublin, Dublin City University. Thank you very much, indeed, Professor, for your comments. One of the things I would like you to explain to the committee, and bearing in mind my interest, so I probably already know the answer to that in the worst case of a barrister, as you know that. Could you explain in your discussions with the other Russell Group universities the difference between the funding regime in the rest of the United Kingdom and what you're having to deal with? And secondly, are you seeing, because your global rankings, and I know we shouldn't be talking about global rankings, but you've dropped from 120 down towards 200 in the Times ranking list, what impact that is having on trying to attract high-quality postgraduate students coming to Northern Ireland? Please.
Okay, well, well, thank you for those questions. The first one, actually, so the difference between ourselves and England in particular is that in England now they have both public funding and the ability to charge fees of £9,000. They also have had the Mazen cap lifted, so they're able to increase the number of students that actually can now come to their universities.
Can you just explain that to the wider committee?
So currently we have, and it used to be the same throughout the UK, that there was a cap on the number of students that universities could recruit each year, and we all worked within a Mazen cap. That was lifted in England 2 years ago, and however we have a Mazen cap which is still implemented. But of course, on top of the Mazen cap, the bigger issues we have is that we have a public funding, but our private funding is actually capped at 3,750 roughly. So, however, the public funding, as I've already alluded to, has decreased from 215 million, 14 million, down to 185 million over the last 5 years, or actually further 169 because of the further 16.1 million. So, so we've had a very significant drop in our public funding. The public funding dropped in England in 2010, and however, at that time they were allowed to go and charge fees of £9,000. So that's why you're seeing 9%, 10% growth year on year now in England in relationship to what they can now do. And of course, actually, one of the really positive outcomes of that is the widening participation levels, particularly at Russell Group universities, has gone way up because that money has been used to provide scholarships and to allow those who are less advantaged and those who are disadvantaged to actually access those stellar institutions. The second question?
The second question about the impact of dropping down the global rankings.
Yeah, so the impact of global rankings are very significant. One of the things I have to say we've been successful at is maintaining our top 200. We have improved that very slightly. We're in around 175, 6 at the moment. But our ability to get into the top 100 is limited by this. The importance of that is both in terms of recruiting undergraduates and postgraduates internationally, which actually are drivers for our economy. It's not just that they're good for the university, they're good for our wider economy. Every international student that comes here spends per annum £30,000 to £35,000 in our local economy, builds international networks for us for life when they go back home. So they make a very positive contribution to life when they come here. So our ability to attract those is hampered because the perception is you're not in that top class, you're not in that top 100. And of course, as you slide and you get further away from that, you are not going to get the best students coming here from across the world. And that's what we're working hard now to reverse.
Just as a supplementary, Professor, obviously one of the things we would like to see is Queen's and our university sector being in that top 100. And one of the things that would be interesting to hear from you and from the sector as well, what we would have to do as a government to get you to that position. Because I think looking forward for Northern Ireland, that is going to be vital, because we are in competition with areas like Manchester, areas like London, areas like Scotland, as well as areas like Dublin as well. And getting a university up into the top 100 should be a strategic goal for Northern Ireland PLC. But please.
Well, first of all, completely agree with that comment. But to say our biggest competition is not in the UK or Ireland, it's now in Southeast Asia and China. Yep. Those universities are now accelerating, and they're accelerating for one reason. The level of investment is going up by hundreds of %. So, for example, I'm just back from China 3 weeks ago. The Chinese government is actually putting 160 billion into its second-tier cities, into universities, very deliberately, to actually grow their economies in those second cities. And that's what their program for government actually is running from 16 through to 21, and they just announced that about 3 months ago. Very, very deliberate. The other strategy they have is build up the postgraduate and international strategy, and they're looking to countries like Russia, and other Southeast Asian countries. So yes, this is something we have to take very seriously, and it is why I am so concerned, because we are the first sign, and I've said this to some of you around the table before, the first sign of us beginning to hemorrhage our global standing is our top talent leaving. And that's what we have to, those of us around the table, have to work hardest. Once you start to lose your best professors who can go anywhere in the world, and even the better universities in terms of size, the Manchesters and UCLs, will only have probably 25 to 30. Queen's only has about 20 of those professors. Once they start to leave, that signal goes all over the world. And your ability to attract and retain starts to hemorrhage very significantly. And that's my biggest concern over the next 2 to 3 years.
Could I just maybe add, just in terms of a response to the question, higher education really is a global pursuit of talent. In a sense, that's staff and students. So if we take staff, and Professor Johnson has already alluded to that, but what attracts staff is, in a sense, have they got an environment which is conducive to taking forward world-class research? I feel like once you secure them, in a sense, it's very important, because they have a magnetic effect in terms of growing. Individual professors have growing. Dundee, for instance, in terms of that was based on one professor who grew the whole biotech industry in Dundee. In a sense, so that's very important. In terms of students, the global pursuit of students, in a sense, students, obviously, the influences there are not only the students but their parents, and if they are sponsored students in terms of governments, what governments look to is this that you've just raised, league tables. If you are not positioned in those league tables, I mean, you don't even have an opportunity to actually, market, to sell the value proposition that you could have in terms of those students. So the importance of investing in a world-class higher education institution, I mean, is extremely important in terms of, not only in terms of the ambitions which you as an executive have in terms of Northern Ireland being a competitive economy, but also, that global pursuit of talent, which is essential in terms of a knowledge economy, which is where we are seeking to pitch ourselves.
Okay, thank you very much. We have Gordon, the elder.
Thanks. Well, on that note, you're very welcome, and making that presentation, I think, has been very informative. I've been on the DETI committee for some time, the previous committee, and we've heard a lot about the skills gap. What more can the university do to bring forward and address the issue of the skills gap, and as we look forward to the reduction in corporation tax and all the opportunities that flow from that?
Well, this is something that's very high on our agenda and has been now for the last 5 years. First of all, working very closely with local businesses, so ensuring that a lot of our programs are actually aligned with the needs of local businesses and indeed international business, making sure that our students get the opportunity to, as part of their course, to go and work in some of these companies, so they get skills training there. We also have things like Student Plus now, where we're developing leadership and training skills outside of just the degree programme. We're actually doing other things for our students around the Leadership Institute as well. And so building that whole framework. The other thing that we've set up is a business forum within the university with some of the chief executives of our leading industries on those. And they're actually informing the courses and indeed the direction of travel that we're now moving in. We've just completed a review of every single course at Queen's. We've actually, both the curriculum and also the structure of the course. We're setting up a number of academies, and those are being set up with a view to linking in with industry, so industry can come in and teach in those software academies, mathematics academies, and there will be a number of others that will evolve over the course of the next number of years. And we want to ensure that every course in the university now is aligning with opportunities that exist within the economy and indeed the community as well. That's the other area I should point to, because we now have community groups working with, for example, our School of Education, Social Sciences and Social Work. So this is very, very high on our agenda. I think then in terms of corporation tax, as I said in my initial opening, this is something that we see as a real positive. However, on its own, it's not going to do anything for the economy. Because the differential, first of all, between ourselves and the rest of the UK is going to be smaller anyway. But in the absence of graduates, we are not going to pull the foreign direct investment that we actually need to pull in to make that sort of seismic jump and bring back that talent base, by the way, from here that's sitting all over the world, that I meet when I travel, that I talk to, who would come home. They're still in their 30s and 40s, some of them. They would think about moving home if the right type of jobs were here for them and give that type of leadership that I've talked about.
Okay. On the issue of student flow, Chair, 37% of our students go to mainland UK and elsewhere. But is one of the reasons not that there's a wider range of subjects available and more opportunities?
No, I think the evidence speaks for itself. If you actually just look at that table, right, you will see we've lost 2,263 student positions in the last year. That's over the next, up until 2018. If you look at the table, you'll see the impact of that immediately. 530 additional students have left. So it's not because the courses aren't here. Of course, there will be students who will, go because there may be some courses that are not available. But not at that sort of level. And that's there just are not the places, is really what this number is telling us.
So you need extra funding?
Absolutely, we need extra funding. And it's an absolute priority, because I have to say, we're now in a 2-3 year framework where if we don't address this, we will not be a top world-class institution.
Thanks very much. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Sinead.
Thank you for the presentation so far. Like others, I'm sure I share, and it's not a shock to me to see the figures about student movement. I think we're all aware of that. We're acutely aware of that. But I suppose in this committee coming together, there was hope and continues to be hope that the bringing together of the former DETI and employment and learning made so much sense. Some committees don't marry so well in my mind, but this one certainly does. And I notice in your chart, you rightly work your way through the executive programme for government, ending up with corporation tax, because that is simply a tool at the end of all these other functions happening and being structurally in place. We see slippage. It's clear slippage is happening in terms of reputation and that competitiveness across the world. And I suppose, adding to what Gordon was probably alluding to, could you give me a picture of frontline services from a student or potential student perspective? Have actual courses had to disappear? I know numbers of places are compromised, but in terms of your offer across the subject range, how is that looking at the moment?
It's a really important question. So we've looked really hard at this over the last 18 months. So in our first swipe at this last year, we actually just cut right across the university. We didn't cut courses, but just numbers. And over the last 18 months, we've been looking through a process called Size and Shape of the university at every course. And we've come to the conclusion that we can't lose any courses. As a Russell Group university, we believe that there are none of the courses that we have that society doesn't need. And that's been, and some of us would have gone into this with the idea that we possibly could maybe have lost one or two courses, but we've come to the conclusion that we cannot. Indeed, we've gone further actually in saying, no, what we need to do is align courses with other opportunities and be much more creative. So, for example, we're now having new courses created in, for example, digital creative image and art. So bringing technology here in the Science Park to what we do in drama, music, etc. We're thinking about natural sciences being a programme where you might be doing engineering, but you also might be doing some aspects of humanity. We're thinking of bringing modern languages much more closely integrated into our business degree programmes and bringing on Arabic languages and also Cantonese and Mandarin into those as well, and really, making those link much more. And indeed introducing English language courses for some of the people coming from outside in a way that we don't do currently. So we're getting very creative with the types of courses. We're stopping 50% of our postgraduate courses because we don't believe they are, first of all, being taken up by significant numbers, that they're really relevant to society, and we're creating new courses that actually are much more cross-disciplinary and much more relevant to where society needs to go. It's a very radical change, I have to just compliment my colleagues for taking on that level of challenge right across the institution. So, and I don't see that as something that we're going to stop. In a world-class institution, you're always innovating. You're always innovating, whether it's in research or in the curriculum, and that's what we are actually going to ensure we do going forward.
Thank you.
Okay. Tom?
Thank you. I think that last point's a good point, where you're changing in order that students are being trained up to meet the needs that's out there, rather than training somebody for something that demand's not there. But what's the gap in funding that we're talking about? How much is that losing you then in leverage from other outside bodies, where you'd use that funding for leverage for other?
Well, as you know, we have been very successful in leveraging funding. So we've invested, just for the committee to be aware, in the last 10 years, 350 million capital investment in our campus. We have plans for, right now, for over 300 million additional. A lot of that money is leveraged from our foundation board, from grants that we got from Dell, now from the Department of Economy, and then accessing national programs like UKR PIF, which we were able to match on a 2-to-1 basis and build the Centre for Experimental Medicine. The Centre for Cancer Research and Cell Biology was built through the SPUR programme, again, leveraged funding. So our ability to do this is actually top class in my view. The problem is that we're now at a situation where within the next 3 years, actually within the next 2.5 years, we're going to run our capital reserves down to the most dangerous level this university's ever been at recently. And so any future capital investment is actually in jeopardy. Our ability to actually grow the institution is actually now very limited. We've taken a risk because, as you may have heard, we've actually invested an additional £72 million into the university, hiring 170 new staff. We're actually doing that. But we're taking a risk doing that, because we have to find the money to sustain that going forward. What we're hoping is that the leverage point for particularly the talent base that we want to bring in is actually going to give us more leverage, but we don't know that until they're in place. And that's why I think we've come to a point now where, indeed, we just had this discussion at Senate yesterday. There are some really tough decisions now in the next 2 years for the institution. Where indeed we may have to say, well, we just don't have the funding to continue with that programme anymore. And it's not like we haven't been doing this now for 2 years. We have. We've actually grown the turnover in the institution while we've had a starvation from 214 down to 160 million. We've actually grown our turnover to over 300 million. at a time when our public budget's been cut. How have we done that? We've done that through increasing our research contracts and increasing our international profile. We have doubled our international profile over the last 5 years. If we hadn't done that, we would be closing down subject areas.
Just on the leverage point, Chair, in a sense that Tom raises, in a sense, for every pound of public funding, I mean, we leverage that 2 to 1. So, just at its very basic, a £300 million business, of which 100 million comes from government.
Just one final thing on that, Chair, was you talked earlier about companies knocking on your door looking to see, well, you know, you're not training students for this or for that. Are those companies then prepared to give some funding toward the training of those students? If they are actually looking for students and looking for you to train students for them, well then are they prepared to, you know, obviously our funding gap there, are they prepared to contribute something toward that?
I think at an undergraduate level, not really in terms of in a significant way. At a postgraduate level, they are, and so. But that certainly is something that needs to be part of the conversation. But companies, understand about lifelong learning now in a way that they probably didn't 10 years ago, and we are very engaged in that. So one of the things that we're looking at for our postgraduate courses is actually creating multiple entry points for certificate, diploma, masters, which allow people to continue in work and do those sort of things. But do the companies actually see themselves subsidising higher education? Absolutely not.
Through the Chair.
I bring you in there, and Steve. There's a couple more people want to ask a question. Kiva?
Actually, Tom has just asked my question. It was around the innovative models for sustainable funding and the potential for industry investment into that. So you've pretty much answered it.
Okay, thank you. Alan? And then
thank you, Chairman. Just maybe the elephant in the room. But you've talked to our professor about the leverage of getting grants and so forth. Brexit. You haven't mentioned the European Union. Does the university enjoy any level of support through Europe, and does our membership of the European Union facilitate any joint research opportunities for the university?
It does, and it contributes very significantly. So 4 years ago, we put a significant resource into increasing our visibility within Brussels, and we've been very successful now in the Horizon 2020 programmes, bringing in around 12 to 13 million pounds per year of European funding. Indeed, just in September of last year, we pulled in the largest ever grant to the university of close to 50 million, 19 million of which came directly to the university, leading with 8-9 other centres across Europe on a major medical initiative in bronchitis and bronchiectasis and cystic fibrosis across Europe. There's multiple other ones. Indeed, I am a PI on a cancer programme called Mercuric, which is with 8 centres. The total funding pool for that is €8.5 million. And that started 18 months ago. So there are multiple programmes that are going on, and we have multiple networks across Europe. Europe actually brings in to the UK in general close to 1.4 billion in research funding. We contribute 700 million nationally to Europe in terms of the research ledger, but we bring back over twice that to UK universities.
Thank you.
Okay, Steve, brief supplementary.
Just a very brief supplementary. And again, I think, Chair, going forward, I hadn't realised the capital situation was getting to that point, and I think we as a committee should be taking a very close interest in this, because as Sinead quite rightly whispered to me there, we've got rid of the family silver, and the greatest strength that Northern Ireland has, its intellectual capital, and our intellectual capital is levered by the great universities that we have. And if we don't do something about this investment soon, we're in real trouble.
You're also going to lose thousands of jobs, because that money actually pays for thousands of jobs in the economy.
Okay, thank you very much for that. It's a much clearer picture, and we're obviously going to talk to you now, and the committee will obviously continue to have interest as a substantial part of our new area of work. But thank you and your team for the presentation. We wish you well, and we'll continue to engage and try and offer whatever support we can.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Might have to for about 45 minutes or so. Back again, but
okay, our next item is item 6, is the briefing from Ulster University. There's a briefing paper at page 94, and the clerk's memo and the research paper are page 17 and 22 of the pack. They're also relevant. Just wait on the members coming in. So you're very, very welcome. We have Professor Nixon, the Vice-Chancellor, Professor Adair and Mr. Peter Hope from Ulster University. And I suppose, as in our previous guests, we just invite you to make some opening remarks in relation to the university where it's at the moment, some of the challenges that face you. We're obviously extremely conscious of financial challenges that are facing the university as well, but we'd like to hear it from your perspective, and then we'll allow members to ask some questions in relation to the presentation.
Absolutely. And are we waiting for Dr. Archibald Kiva to return?
She just popped out.
No, that's. I think she's well versed in University of Ulster. Or Ulster
she is indeed, yes. Okay, well, look, thank you very much for the invitation. It's very clear from the invitation this is about getting to know the university and building a bit of an understanding and relationship, so we're delighted with that. I brought Alistair Adair, who's our Deputy Vice-Chancellor, here and as a long-standing member of the university, and Peter Hope is our Chief Financial and Information Officer, so whenever the numbers come out, I'll always look left. So I guess I'll just start out with what you won't be surprised to hear is an unashamed sales pitch for the university. Ulster University is unquestionably a world-leading university, and we deliver outstanding research and outstanding teaching, and I'm very proud of that. But there's a broader context for it as well. Ulster University is multiple campus university, which is quite unique in the whole of these islands, and particularly in the United Kingdom. And as a consequence, we have a very civic responsibility to multiple communities, whether that's Belfast, and it's becoming very real through the buildings there, in Coleraine and the associated areas and Coast and Glens, and through our Magee campus in Derry, Londonderry. And each of these has a very different role in that community, but as a collective, they're there to support, in my view, the ongoing social and economic prosperity of Northern Ireland. For me, that's the foundation of the new strategy the university will put forward, that we will assert ourselves as Northern Ireland's civic university with an absolutely clear mandate from our perspective to deliver outstanding teaching, to transform lives where possible and give them opportunities that weren't ever there, to be a real contributor to the research infrastructure of Northern Ireland, and as a consequence, the economic development, inward investment, and all of the developments that sit inherently in many of the aspirations of Northern Ireland. And also to make a really genuine positive contribution, and that positive can be a very sort of soft word, but I mean it in a very hard sense, to the social, cultural and economic life of Northern Ireland. We're a university that has 27,000 students. I have the details of how they break down just in anticipation of questions. But that's 27,000 students in the round. It's about 24,500 FTE distributed across 3 campuses and split between full-time undergraduate, part-time undergraduate, master's courses and PhD researchers. We're in the top 3% of universities in the world. And I say that with some pride because there's over 16,000 universities worldwide, and to achieve that status is a real, genuine reflection of the quality of the research and teaching that goes on within the university. We're in the top 25% of research universities in the United Kingdom, and with some distinct and very impressive achievements in that space. We're the first for what quality of research in law in the whole of the United Kingdom. We're 33rd place in the world for our nursing research, 7th in biomedical sciences. We've got 2 Turner Prize winners and 7 finalists for art as a quality indicator of that. But also we're in the top 10 of art and design, architecture, civil engineering, etc. I can wax lyrical, and I will provide that in writing subsequently, but you can be assured that we are of the highest quality in terms of the research that we undertake, and we compete on a global stage as a consequence. We're also in the top 15 universities in the whole of the United Kingdom as indicated by student satisfaction, and that is a proxy, if you will, for the quality of our teaching. Students are very vocal, as you'll be well aware, and will speak very quickly if things aren't going well. And in that context, it's a deep reflection of the quality of the teaching we do and the attention and pastoral care we give to students across all our campuses. To get an 89% in the National Student Survey is a really difficult task. There's 160 universities-ish around the United Kingdom. Being in the top 15 is an outstanding achievement in my mind and is a real reflection of the opportunities that we provide to students in Northern Ireland. Just to give you a little bit of a sense of the teaching and research component before I go on to the economic element of this, we are very conscious and always have been as a university, long before I ever took the reins of this institution, that we are there to support the professional and economic life of Northern Ireland. So our courses are very much tailored to the desire to support the development of jobs and prosperity here. And I can just point to 2 or 3 things just as simple examples of that. In very recent times, we were supported by the Chicago Stock Exchange Trust, which is a philanthropic trust, the first time it ever invested outside of the United States, and it supported us to establish a financial trading room to train people in financial analytics and financial mathematics and trading, really as an indicator of us being at the forefront of that part of education in business and finance. And I can talk about a number of those examples, but ultimately what we're articulating is that we look very carefully to the marketplace, to the needs of Northern Ireland and to the employability of our students, and tailor our courses particularly to deliver that. And that doesn't mean that we just focus on those barometer areas where I think there's 29,000 jobs that the skills barometer is identified in the future. We actually do we're a broad university, so everything through our arts and humanities, social sciences, all the way through to our hard engineering and computing at the other end. I'm particularly proud of the fact that every year we have 2,000 student placements in businesses around Northern Ireland, primarily. Some of those placements are outside of Northern Ireland. And that, for me, is a very significant number. I've yet to verify this, so I'll couch it a little bit, but it certainly puts us very close to the collective number for the entirety of the Scottish system in terms of placements. That's the scale that we sit at in terms of the number of jobs. And those students are out there, whether they're doing 1 month, 3 month or 12-month placements, they're very much in the space of contributing to the development of companies, small and large, in Northern Ireland. But it also prepares them for employability, prepares them for the job market, and 90% of our graduates are in employment within 6 months, and after 12 months we're pretty close to significantly higher than that. 100% is possibly a challenging number, but we aspire to that sort of level of employability as an indication of the quality of the education we provide. We invest about £40 million per year on research, and I am a strong believer in the relationship between research and teaching. Because we are a high-quality research university, our researchers are educated in those issues that are very current about the future of particular industries and the challenges that face them, and consequently our students are educated with the most up-to-date information. And I think that relationship between teaching and research is absolutely critical. If I just move to the economic elements, the impact the university has, there was and I'm confident that our colleagues in Queen's will have pointed to this also. The Universities UK did an analysis, as they do for all the universities, of the economic impact of each university and then the sector as a whole on the Northern Ireland economy. Even if you just take the very simple elements of it, we employ people and spend £112 million a year on salaries, which goes directly out to support the community. We invest about 43.7 in businesses in Northern Ireland who supply services to the university. And there's these economic models that point to the multiplier effect of that, and that's in the order of £810 million per year. So that's a significant role that we play in the economic life of Northern Ireland, and we do that across all of our campuses and across, effectively, a large proportion of the actual Northern Ireland itself. In recent times, and we pride ourselves on the relationships we have and our ability to apply knowledge and research, and we've had 20 spin-out companies, currently with a turnover of £28 million and 290 staff. Again, reading things that are already written in front of you, but just to point to the fact that we're really trying to focus our endeavours on ensuring that not only are we supporting existing businesses and existing economic activity, but we're looking to seed some of those areas which will be about the future of Northern Ireland. I think it's also important to point, and there's been numerous studies on this, our graduates typically are going to earn approximately between 40 and 50% more in their lifetime than students that don't achieve an undergraduate degree. And that gives them an opportunity to contribute back into the economic life of Northern Ireland. About 89%, if I recollect, of our graduates remain in Northern Ireland. So really, the people that we educate here have a long-term impact in Northern Ireland itself. And every year we spend we engage with about 5,000 businesses across Northern Ireland. I think we've done 1,000 innovation solutions for those businesses. So we're deeply connected to that whole community of business, with a particular focus on small and medium-sized businesses, family businesses, that area, as well as our engagements with multinationals, but really about that rock bed of business and economic activity in Northern Ireland. I guess one of the key challenges, of course, as you will well understand, and one of the things that I'm particularly keen to engage in recent times is on the back of that, hopefully clear indication of the value of higher education to Northern Ireland, there is a fundamental challenge that sits in front of us, which is the sustainability of the funding regime in Northern Ireland. And I don't wish to press the point too hard at this point, but I'm very clear in that we are currently fourth-class citizens in the UK in respect of our higher education funding. It's approximately £2,000 per student less than any other part of the United Kingdom gets, and we are still achieving high impact and high value for the monies that we get and the students that we educate, but that isn't sustainable into the future, and we have to have a very serious and hard debate about that. And for me, that's perhaps the most critical thing over the next 12 months, is to really face that out and work out what is the right compromise solution to ensure we have a sustainable higher education system into the future. I'll finish a little bit on our future directions. On Friday of the last week, the University Council signed off, subject to the usual tweaks, the next strategic plan for Ulster University. And we've taken a reasonably ambitious perspective on that strategic plan. Obviously, it indicates with our direction and our aspirations for the next 5 years, but it also sets a very clear ambition for our 50th anniversary, which is about 18 years away. I picked that simply because if you look around the world, there are 50-year-old universities that are having absolutely amazing impact in their areas. And I can point to Warwick, I can point to universities in Australia, I can point to universities in the United States, many of them really competing on an international stage with the ancient universities that are 400, 500 or 600 years old. So we've got to have an aspiration to be one of those 50-year-old universities, and we already are at some level because of QS rankings. We are in the top 100 of young universities in the world. But in setting that ambition, it really focuses our endeavours over the next 5 years on what is the core mission of the university, which is academic excellence, teaching and research excellence. It focuses very much on our global engagement, because what we have to do is have real global reach, but actually local impact. It focuses, perhaps surprisingly with some of our university colleges, on the operational excellence of the university, the entirety of the university community, whether it's the catering staff all the way through to the most senior academic staff and their role in making the university a vibrant place. But the key element, the binder, if you will, across this strategic plan is reasserting the mission that was in the formation of Ulster University, which is to be Northern Ireland Civic University, to really look carefully at the needs of our communities that we're sitting in, needs of Northern Ireland, and align, where possible, our activities for the benefit of Northern Ireland. And for me, that actually gives us a huge opportunity. Without wishing to be pejorative in describing this, if you take Northern Ireland as a living laboratory, and there are some fundamentally huge challenges ahead of us, we can't solve those for Northern Ireland, but we can be a significant part of picking some of those challenges and working very closely with all the stakeholders. And in doing that, actually positions us as a global university, because these are deep problems, whether it's the health service or education attainment or transitional justice or whatever those are. These are problems that are faced globally, yet the scale of Northern Ireland and the ability to engage very, very personally with all the players in these systems allows us to engage, deliver solutions with our stakeholders, and then we get to do what we do, which is publish papers and tell the world what we've learned from that and have a global impact as a consequence. I guess I will conclude, and I'm sure there are questions that I could probably preempt, but I'll just wait a little bit, by saying I've been in post 12 months. I looked at this university when I was applying, and it was a little bit about coming back home. I thought, that's a wonderful university, it's got huge potential. There were many things when I arrived that I didn't realise quite how good it is, and I'm not saying that just because I am the Vice-Chancellor, but because actually the university, and perhaps Northern Ireland more broadly, doesn't sing quite loudly enough the quality and the talent that we have, and Ulster University has certainly been in that space, but under my leadership, it will certainly be not be shy about saying how good we are, about the things that we are genuinely good at. I'm deeply proud as a consequence to be the Vice-Chancellor, and my role is simply a custodian of an institution that will long last beyond me, and I've got to leave it in a better place than I started, and that's my ambition for the university. And if we do that, it will have a deep impact in Northern Ireland moving forward.
Okay. Thank you very much for that, and congratulations for the work done to date. We did get a sense from Queen's in terms of the hard facts and figures and the funding deficit. You were talking about the ability to do things better here, and that the international impact that have. Do you see that as making a contribution to the funding deficit that you face, as well as whatever other solutions can be worked through between the university and the executive?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
Essentially, what can you, in terms of your advancing some of the things, particularly at the end when you talk about the future direction, what will that bring to the table?
So I actually genuinely believe universities as autonomous entities, as well as engaging with government about that issue of funding, we have to be masters of our own destiny in terms of the development of a sustainable university, financially and otherwise. So it's quite clear to me that engaging in an international context has got many benefits: cultural diversity, ability for us to do collaborations internationally, research, which inevitably have higher impact than they would if you collaborate locally. But in the first instance, it's certainly about us diversifying some of our income streams. We need to grow the number of international students that we have within our campuses, across the 3 campuses in Belfast, Coleraine, Derry, Londonderry, and also we have some regional campuses in London and Birmingham. For me, that's a critical one. If we reach the national average for the pre-92 universities, which is the set of universities that ourselves and Queen's fall into, that would be adding approximately about £10 million per annum into the income stream of the university. It's a long game to do that. It's not a short game. You don't turn it around in 12 months. And we, probably as a consequence of history, as a university, haven't felt it necessarily to focus in that area, but we now have a very clear view that we have to focus in that. We'll have to invest behind it, but the returns are very significant financially and academically, and I think in the medium term that's the more important element of it. In the short term, it provides us an income stream that will support the development of the university. There are then the other obvious elements, one of which is engagement with industry and co-funding and collaborations, and I'm a particular advocate of that. In my last institution, it was the model was to try and get 5-to-1 return on a research dollar versus what you would get from industry. The challenge across the United Kingdom is much harder, but we should certainly be looking for those levels of return and collaboration. So whatever investment we get from government should be matched or otherwise from industry partners where possible. Obviously, we'll be progressing, as every university does, aggressively the philanthropy space, but that's about particular projects and people and places. It's really about those things that are special about a university. I'm delighted to be hosting a dinner tonight for the launch of the Hume O'Neill Chair in Peace and Justice, which was funded, it's the first fully funded chair in the university through philanthropy. We'll be looking to grow that quite significantly, and I've been working very closely with the colleagues in America who do this par excellence. So we'll be looking at that area of funding as well. And then we have to be innovative, I think, in how we look at our teaching programs as well. Masters, part-time, and other areas of growth. We've got to look for those funding areas that are outside of that core MASN, to use the phraseology of the core funding that comes from government.
Okay, thank you. You haven't mentioned in your paper the expansion of McGee, which is obviously one of the critical areas facing, and I'm sure other people will talk about what's been done in Belfast. We could be here all day. There's huge developments there, which is obviously a very significant game changer for the city centre in Belfast, but the expansion of McGee is seen to be a game changer for the North West. How do you see that developing? Is that purely what the executive can bring to the table in that regard, or I know the university are on board for those types of expansion plans. How would you see it developing?
Can I answer a general question before I answer the specific one? One of the things we really are asserting in the strategic plan is the uniqueness of all of our campuses. It's very visible in Belfast what's happening, but we have ambitious plans both for Coleraine and for McGee. The McGee one obviously has got a bit of history in terms of the development of the economic case. But the plans for each of the campuses are critical for me. We need to give every campus a unique identity, things that sit on that campus that are solely for that campus, and then give a longevity to that particular area. I'm very interested, for actually in the Coleraine context, of looking at an educational campus that maybe co-locates the whole sort of spectrum of learning on the campus, along with a veterinary school. In the context of the McGee campus, there is obviously a very well-articulated aspiration to get to about 9,600 students from our current base of about 4,500. That's an ambitious plan over 10 years. It will require core funding from government, but it has to be done in collaboration with all of those mechanisms I've just suggested. We had international recruitment agents up in McGee very recently, specifically looking at the idea of establishing an international college there that would provide a gateway or a pathway into the university for international students. You'd be very aware of our ambitions, which for a medical school, and I believe the BMA's annual meeting that's hosted here in Belfast gave some support to that just yesterday. That for us will be 700 students, but we'll look for additional funding to support that. From my perspective, the aspiration is there. Now we need to, if you will, chunk it into manageable components that talk about how each part of that is sustainable and what's the mix of public versus private funding to deliver it.
And the business plan for that is sitting with the Minister and the Department at the moment?
Yeah, so the economic case was put, we went through the conversations over about 9 months just before the election. My understanding is the economists came to the conclusion that we'd answered all their questions, and it's now sitting for the Minister to take it to the next stage, and then subsequently, subject to the processes that were said there, it would then move to DFP.
Okay, thank you very much. Steve?
First of all, thank you very much indeed, Professor Nixon. I need to declare an interest because until recently I was a CEO at another top 50 university under 50 in the Irish Republic. You probably know that already, but anyway. So.
And I know Brian very well.
Yeah, I know, I think that would be the case. One of the things you talk quite eloquently about the fact that sort of you look at Warwick, you look at Bath, and you look at universities like DCU and what they've been able to do as well. Can you outline what you think you need to do and what sort of investment you need to do to achieve that? That's the first sort of question, so that we can quantify that sort of position. And the second one is to go back to sort of the issue about sort of McGee College. What links are you looking to do to build with the Letterkenny ITs and looking at the other ITs, particularly in Sligo and Letterkenny, and looking at the sort of the opportunity to cluster and develop real sort of all-island sort of skill sets in that particular area as well? It might sound strange coming from somebody from a unionist background, having been closely involved with Joe McHugh and sort of various sort of areas within the Northwest. You know, the area is crying out for a 10,000 student plus high-tech university campus, and I think that would be one of the major drivers, and I think universities are all major drivers for the economy. And I think it's one of the sort of key things we should be looking for, but please.
Okay, so I'm trying to go back to your first question, which is effectively the level of investment required for us to achieve
to get
the
to Warwick or
aspirations on the 50-year. I know this might sound like the obvious answer, but achieving parity of funding levels with our colleagues in the rest of the United Kingdom, I think, is the first step in that. Now, that's been well articulated, and there was a paper through to the executive, but the shortfall is about 55.1 million collectively for the 2 universities per year. If we were to take our reasonable share of that, as is calculated by the usual formula, it's about 25, 26 million. That will give us the ability to do the key thing that we need to do, which is invest in staff.
Yeah.
Right? The key differentiator between a good university and an average university and an excellent university is the quality of the staff.
Yeah.
We have outstanding staff, as I've already indicated, through the achievements that we already have, but we need more of them. We need a broader international dimension to our staff. And to do that, we have to be able to fund those elements, and that's at the heart, for me, of how we achieve that rankings element. There is another one, for me, which is critical. Rankings are fickle things. I don't like them. The algorithms don't sound, and I'm a mathematician. But there are key elements to it. There's reputation, and we have to work very hard at, as I said, selling the Northern Ireland proposition, the educational capacity of Northern Ireland for both universities and the island investment proposition. I think that will go a long way to changing the reputation of the university, which is already very high, but there's work to be done there.
But not wishing to put words into your mouth, a commitment to 55 million, or commitment to actually investing in the higher education sector, not only sends a message internally, but it sends a very strong message externally.
Yeah, absolutely. And the one thing that I am passionate about is stability in the funding model for Northern Ireland. If we have stability, then we can plan, and we will get on and we will do our business, which is, to raise the additional funds and to realise those strategic ambitions. But without that stability, academics are very mobile. And they are very sought after for the best universities. If there's a vibrant community with a beautiful place to live, which is what we have, and stability in the funding regime, we will attract them. If they look in and see cuts or yo-yo funding, I think we would be in a very difficult situation.
Yeah.
To move to the other one, which is the Magee campus and the expansion there, again, I would say, irrespective of whether it's Magee, Coleraine or Belfast, collaborations with other institutions as part of the international university game. We have an MOU with DCU, as it turns out, and we are working very collectively on 2 or 3 key areas of collaboration, specifically for our mutual development, but also for our international collaborations. In the context of the Magee campus, we already have deep conversations with Letterkenny IT, with the Northwest Regional College in Derry, Londonderry itself. We have conversations with NUI Galway and with IT Sligo. So we will develop those relationships, but they will be around specific endeavours, not in the generic. So we've got to look at pathways. So yesterday we announced a collaboration with LYIT on pharmacy. We're the #1 pharmacy teaching university in the whole of the United Kingdom. We do the degrees and the PhDs and the masters, and LYT is doing the pre-training in that space, building towards master's capacity. So those sort of natural relationships where there is a, I don't like the word, but a synergy between the strategic ambitions of, in this case, LYIT and Ulster University, then we can build those relationships. But you're absolutely correct. We've got to do collaborations. That's the only way these major initiatives get delivered.
And just as a sort of a final point, one of the most significant issues we're seeing on the island of Ireland is the sort of the depopulation of the West. And you see the problems that Galway's having, trying to attract students, the problems the ITs are having. And one of the ways to stop that is to be able to invest quite in sort of critical areas. And we see sort of Magee and to a degree Coleraine as critical areas as well. But you have our support for that.
And can I just say, and this genuinely does apply to both Coleraine and to our Magee campus, the infrastructure for inward investment is physical. It might be digital or roads or whatever it has, and it's things like the FE and the HE colleges. If you invest in those and produce an environment which is really attractive to inward investment, then you will follow through with the inward investment. You won't get it up front because they'll be looking for the skilled graduates, the road and rail access, the high-speed internet, all of those things. But get those right, and I believe we are part of the infrastructure to deliver economic prosperity in Northern Ireland.
There we go, Mr. Chair. A6 and broadband as well, thrown into the same argument. Thanks very much indeed.
Okay. Sinead.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, very welcome here. Well, firstly, I was concerned about income streams, which I'm fairly satisfied you covered well in your answer to the Chair. But I won't let the opportunity be lost when you made reference to Northern Ireland not singing loudly enough. Yeah. And I think the images that have come over the airwaves over the last since yesterday evening, shall we say, I think there's been plenty of singing from Northern Ireland. But I do take your point that perhaps we don't sing our praises in terms of our educational offer strong enough. I will make the point, I certainly have the perception, whether you can clarify if it's true or not, that Ulster University have a very well-established reputation, I suppose, for dealing with higher education and, working in, you have sort of talked about specific projects. But in terms of your strategic objectives and sustainability, do you see there being any stronger links or pathways created with HE in terms of being able to keep a broad curriculum offer and making it sustainable in a financial sense going forward?
I'll separate the financial sustainability issue from the core point that I think you're making, which is having a very coherent system of further and higher education in Northern Ireland. And I think that's absolutely a critical point. I don't think you can map, if you will, every single journey of a student through every part of the system, whether it's A-levels to university or it's BTECs and FE, etc. I don't think that's actually a useful thing to do, because in doing that you close off options. But I think you should view the system as a whole, and you should make sure that higher education is focused on what it is good at, which is, degrees, masters, PhD. FE is focused on what it is good at. There is an interface point where there's a little bit of an overlap. I think it's important that that overlap is kept to a minimum, not to stop either doing things, but actually to ensure you have a clear and differentiated system in Northern Ireland. For me, that's critical. And I think if you do that, if you then look at the system, then you can start to ask the question, what's the sustainability of the overall system? And then I think you will get some benefits, productivity benefits, if you will, by ensuring there are at least a collection of defined pathways through the system, as well as that you do need a natural marketplace as well. You need a little bit of competitive element within the system to ensure that people are always looking to the next. What's the most critical skill need at the moment? How can we deliver it better? How can we ensure the most the best employability? I think that's a critical element to the system as well.
Vice Chancellor. Chair, can I say, I think it's also important that partners in the educational system, the FE and the HE, offer opportunities, pathways to opportunity, and in that regard the evidence points that to Ulster University, particularly in Magee, reaching into those hard-to-reach communities and young people coming into university, those first-time people coming into university. When you look at the evidence of the socioeconomic groups divided across the 5 quintiles, we're unique in these islands in that we have about 20% of our population coming from the 5 socioeconomic groups. The 20% is the average for the university. When we look at Magee, it's 26% coming into the university from Magee. So we are reaching down with the FE colleges, with the secondary schools, bringing people in. In fact, 50% of the students at Magee are coming from the lower income groups, and that is a tremendous achievement of the university. But we need to have it joined up, as you say, working with all of the schools, the primary, the secondary, FE, and to the higher education.
Well, thank you. That actually does. It's not a perception, it's a reality. Yes. And it's good to hear that.
Yes. And we're if you allow me, Chair, we're taking it even further now, because one of in the hard-to-reach communities, particularly in some of the areas of North and West and indeed East Belfast, we have now a programme of going out into the primary schools, bringing the primary schools into the university. So we're embedding at a very young age the concept. It's as familiar to enter a university as what it is to go to a convenience shop, and that is paying tremendous dividends in terms of the messaging going back to the communities.
Okay. Just a brief supplementary to Sinead's question. Is there an issue? I know some of the regional colleges will provide degree courses, but there's an issue over who owns the degree, who presents the degree, whose degree it is. Is there? Do you have a view on that in relation to that? Some of the colleges aspire to be able to present their own award their own degrees. The universities at the moment are the, if you like, the sponsoring body. Is there an issue with the universities in relation to that ownership of the actual degree itself?
I don't believe there is an issue. I mean, I've certainly not had heads of regional colleges knocking on my door saying there's an issue here. We work very well with those colleges to ensure that we can I guess, validate their degree offerings, and they get effectively a Ulster University degree through that particular college. I think that's an important role that those colleges play in extending the reach and access to higher education into other parts of Northern Ireland. So I think it's a critical role. I don't think there's an issue. I think, go back to my previous point, I think we have to be careful to ensure that we have a system which has clear differentiation between the different providers and what they're trying to achieve. If you start to muddy those waters, actually we all lose focus and we start to do lots of things less well than we do the key things that we're exceptionally good at.
Oh, thank you. Gordon.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks very much for your presentation. Very informative. On the new build programme for Belfast, how is it progressing? And is there funding? Has that been earmarked for that?
Well, it's progressing well. In fact, I was meeting the Minister, Simon Hamilton, just before this, and we took him up to the 7th floor of the new one that was just opened last September, which has been
was in a threatening way, no?
Go easy.
That's setting the tone for the committee moving forward, is it? Yeah. The funding for that, it's a £250 million development. We have a £150 million EIB loan to support that, which we'll be funding through the savings, effectively, that we've made as we move the campus from Jordanstown into Belfast. A full economic appraisal was done of that. How much would it cost to rebuild Jordanstown, etc., etc. And this became very clearly the right solution for the university. I think it was quite a visionary move to do that. Universities are very much city endeavours typically. It allows you to draw in the students from a much wider cohort. It allows them to be much more attractive for international students, much more attractive for international staff as well as home staff. So I think overall, and it's going to add a level of vibrancy to the city, which is absolutely, I don't think we can quite underestimate the impact it will have. We will be delivering that for occupancy at the moment as 2019. Is when we hope to open it. We're very much en route to that. I was showing the Minister today that the foundations, we're down 30 feet into the ground for the underground lecture theatres, which is a big task. There's huge metal struts holding the roads up, which worries me a little bit, but I'm confident in our engineers. And all of the foundations for the lifts are in there. So you know the way these things progress. It takes a while to get out of the ground, and then as soon as it does, it will go up at a rate of knots. And I'd certainly extend an invitation to the whole committee to come to the campus to see that. It's a spectacular development and will have a huge impact in Northern Ireland.
Good. Is there student accommodation included?
No, the Ulster University made a very clear decision not to build and run its own accommodation. We've collaborated, and Alistair can speak a little bit about this, very closely with Belfast City Council. Private providers are proposing builds. Between ourselves and particularly City Council have been looking to ensure that we get a right distribution and looking at the social impact of those over time as well.
Thank you, Vice-Chancellor. Chair, in that regard, we work very closely with a whole range of partners. We're clearly working with Belfast City Council, we're working with Queen's. It's about implementing Belfast City Council's strategic housing study, which Dr. Farriu implemented a number of years ago. And it's very clear that we want to see that delivered. And in fact, we've been grateful in some respects that a number of the planning permissions have kept away from some of the more contentious areas. We are working very closely with the communities in North Belfast. Carl McKillen has a delegation coming in to see me from Carrickhill, and we want to make sure that in the purpose-built student accommodation, it will be managed, it will be looked after properly, unlike what is happening in the Holy Land at the moment. And the last thing we want is a repeat of South Belfast and North Belfast. So we're very conscious that our work towards that end.
Last point, Chair. You talk about supporting local SMEs to maximise their economic contribution. How do you go about doing that?
As I've already sort of outlined in my opening address, there's a number of elements to that, not least student placements, engagements that we do. So there's 5,000 engagements we have with business, supporting them, whether it's staff development or economic planning or business planning. But just to put that in a very concrete sense, we have a centre for SME development within the Ulster Business School. It focuses solely on that community and works very closely with the Federation of Small Businesses, etc., and family businesses, looking at how they take the next steps. Because one of the critical evolutions of a business is going from a small to medium size. There are step changes in processes, finance, all of those things, and we provide a significant amount of the development support for those businesses.
Okay, thanks very much. Thanks, Chair.
Alex.
Thank you, Chair. Just following on from the issue around student accommodation, I mean, obviously very much hope that it all goes very, very well. Certainly some very encouraging developments in the last while back, and I'm very pleased about that, particularly the connections between the City Council and the university itself. I think that's very, very necessary partnership there. But I think it's essential that you do work with the communities, and just putting it on the record, given my own direct experience. I was having previously represented South Belfast and many sleepless nights, even though I didn't even live in the area, around the Holy Land and that broader area. And I think a lesson learned there was that you definitely do need to engage with local communities. Otherwise, you become a bad neighbour, and that's not helpful. Is there not a body of evidence internationally that universities which have the first year at least of a student's tenure at the college or the university actually makes for good behaviour? Because it's actually their accommodation is linked to their ability to stay at university. Moderate behaviour, in other words. And that's why I think that the universities constantly taking the decision not to have any ownership of the accommodation.
Through the Chair, there are two issues here. There's the funding issue, and then there's the accommodation issue. Universities for some time have not been funded in terms of building student accommodation. That was the case many years ago. It's since moved to a private provider. In terms of the accommodation, we, through our accommodation office, we have 900 bed spaces at Jordanstown, and preference is given there, and we encourage our first-year students and international students to live there. Northern Ireland has a unique situation when you look at our student accommodation. We have an under-provision of purpose-built student accommodation. You have a type of accommodation where people come from their home areas and they prefer to live with their friends. And therefore you'll get Ulster students, Queen's students, Belfast Met students all staying in the one house because they come from the same local area. So, seeking to address that, we're working very closely with the communities. I meet on a monthly basis with Liam Keelty and Ray Farley from the South Belfast residents groups. We meet with the New Learning City interagency group, and in fact, after what happened in the Holy Land on St Patrick's Day of this year, we have a 3-page action plan that has been agreed by all of the agencies as to how we stop that. We sympathise and we empathise with the residents in those areas and in terms of the ongoing antisocial behaviour. And we have a process of educating our students as far as we can. It's a case then of working in partnership and disciplining, very importantly, disciplining them. But there's a social media issue as well, and we saw that this year with what happened in the Holy Land, where we knew the potential, St Patrick's Day falling on a Thursday and it being a sunny day, and people poured in their thousands. And when you look at the hard evidence, there were 13 arrests on St Patrick's Day in the Holy Land. 2 were students. 1 was a student from Ulster, Coleraine campus student, and 1 was a student from Queen's. 11 out of the 13 were non-students, and it points to the sheer numbers who come into that area and who effectively, it's binge drinking culture. Now, the action plan that we've got for next year is one of the first actions is that, and very important for this committee chair, lobbying for appropriate legislative changes to address antisocial behaviour in that wider university area. Because last year, people poured in, it's a non-drinking area, but the sheer volume of people, all the police and all the council workers and university volunteers in the world couldn't deal with that. The powers were just too many. And if the same number of people, whether it was a St. Patrick's Day activity or a 12th of July activity, if that activity was on an organised basis, there would be marshals and others in the area. On St. Patrick's Day in the Holy Land, it's not organised, and that's what this plan is saying. We need these wider powers to stop people going into the area or to deal with the binge drinking in the area.
Just a supplementary, I mean, I don't want to labour the point, I just want to reinforce the need for, because obviously you're doing more purpose-built accommodation, which is obviously going to be a key change in all of this, but I certainly want to see the development of the university in the city as a wonderful positive development, and I hope it will be that way, and I expect for the most part it will be, but you will get difficulties if you have a lot of students in the one area. The Holy Land is kind of maybe a little bit acceptable, it's spread in the Strambolis and must be all the Bonify and all the rest. It's just paraphrasing now under the term Holy Land, but it's a much bigger problem if it's not managed. So, because with all due respect, we went through all those plans over the years, it's that hours on hours and hours and number of years on those plans, but it's just not so as it not to recreate the problem elsewhere in the city and make sure that the development of the university is a very positive.
Can I respond to that, Chair? You're right in that, and we want to make that a very positive experience, not only for the residents but for the whole of the city. And in many respects, when you look at what happens in Derry, Londonderry, so far that has worked very well there. And to that end, as part of the programme for government, one of our proposals to that is in terms of making a shared safe space, particularly around the new university campus development in Belfast. We've already had preliminary meetings with the Department of Justice on that, but we are bringing forward proposals with the police, with the Justice and with the City Council for a shared safe space, because if we are to attract more international students, they will want that. They want to come into that area.
Just bring Stephen in. There is also, I mean, in Moira, you also have plans to create space for the community in the vicinity, in the facilities of the university itself, and openness, which I think would be helpful. Perhaps you just give a brief comment on that.
We've actually designed very specifically the spaces so that they are both visually permeable, so people can see in. Because one of the things is if it's not visible, it becomes almost a challenge for people to cross the threshold. But actually, key elements of it are places where the public can come in and engage, very much open to anybody to come to access the cafes, which will be there to access the facilities. And one of the things that I've been very articulate, and I'm quite happy to be on the record of saying, is what we do is move the university into the city centre, and that's it. In a nice new building, we've failed. We've been working very, very hard from the very beginning, and Alistair has been very articulate on this, to bring the communities in, across all the different communities that sit around us, get them in from the very beginning and ask them how we should engage, ask them how we can support them. Also explain the cans and can'ts that we can do, because there are things that we simply can't do, but we can be one of the access points for them to different careers, to engagements, to different opportunities, both culturally and otherwise. And the very last one is there's going to be a very simple economic rub-off in the local community just from jobs that we provide there, cafes that pop up, etc. So there's an immediate economic lift, and we need to work more on that to ensure that it's seen as a genuine benefit. To your point, it has to be a genuine good to the community, and we've got to work very hard at that.
Yeah. Chair, can I just add one more thing to what the Vice-Chancellor has indicated? Last September and this March we held 2 economic forums in the new building, and when the community groups come in and were taken up to that 7th floor, the wow factor and the very fact that they're seeing now the social clauses coming out of the ground, opportunities there. We have earmarked community engagement spaces. The first 3 floors of the new building are accessible to the public, and this is why we have a commitment to every primary school in that North Belfast, West Belfast area to come into the university and see our spaces. And we're very keen to make sure that when the building is built. To us, what would be failure is young people coming from New Lodge, Tigers Bay, Carrick Hill, Falls, Shankill, coming to the outside of that building and feeling this is not for them. That is why we're working so hard to get them into the building and they can claim ownership of it.
Okay, thank you. Stephen?
Thanks, Chair, and welcome, Paddy and colleagues. Just take you back to the issue around the funding and the funding gap, and also to an extent the McGee campus. Both you and Queen's have referenced 55 million in terms of the pressure. Just wondering if it's useful just to clarify, that is essentially about a steady state or a return to the status quo ante before the cuts from the executive over the past number of years, but it doesn't take into account any expansion costs. And arising from that, could you give the committee some degree of a flavour of the general ballpark, accepting business cases and entirely through all its stages of both the recurring revenue costs and also the capital investment that will be required to realise that the full vision in terms of the business case, so that we all have a collective understanding of the scale of funding required for the university sector. And also just to reflect that universities have always had a policy that additional places would be directed towards McGee, but you would have presumably ambitions to expand in other campuses as well, so it's not a case of everything would be necessarily thrown into McGee in terms of expansion if it came along. And also that your priority is to address the funding gap and then expand, rather than expand without addressing the funding gap first.
I'll answer the last one first, because I actually think that's an important premise, and I've been very clear with everybody I've spoken to. We have to solve the higher education funding problem first. And I'm a little bit worried about answering questions about numbers from the ex-minister, who probably knows them slightly better than I do. But quite rightly, we have to understand and be very clear that we've got to fund the higher education sector appropriately in Northern Ireland, get it to the right level for the number of students that we currently have. When we resolve that problem, which has an impact on, however we decide to cut it, has an impact on budgets, then we have to look at the broad issue of expansion in the higher education sector. What's the skills needs across Northern Ireland? What's the ambition across Northern Ireland? And then there are the strategic intents of Ulster University as a whole, where we would like to see expansion and where we'd like to see growth. I've been relatively clear that in moving into the Belfast campus, it's a constrained site by virtue of the fact that we have bought that site in a building and putting 6,000 staff and students per day, on average per day, into the city centre. Land values around have gone up, so we will have little or no room for expansion there at this point. So any expansion opportunities for Ulster University are going to sit in our Coleraine and our McGee campuses, and we have different ambitions for both of those. But that would be an additional cost above and beyond the getting the steady state, giving us equity, if you will, with the funding levels in the rest of the United Kingdom. On the specifics of the McGee business case, I can provide a note to the committee on the details of that, which I think would be a useful thing, because I have some of those numbers in my head, but not all of them. But of the order of 300 million over 10 years to achieve the aspiration of about 9,600 students, that is quite a significant uplift, as you can imagine. It costs, on the average, about £10 million for 1,000 students to support them. So we've got to look very carefully at how we achieve that. The capital costs for me, there are a number of fixed points in the expansion. We could accommodate up to about 6,000 to 6,500, depending on what type of students they are on the existing campus infrastructure. Once we go beyond that point, we have to have expansion of capital investment. There's already £11 million investment in progress for a teaching block there. But to give you a very specific example, the one I do know is one of our ambitions in that expansion is the medical school. The approximate cost, and that is specialist buildings, so it would have to be invested in up front. The approximate cost for that is about 16 million prior to any economic assessments and plans being developed. So that's a very specific number that would show, and that's for about, give or take, 1,000 students. It wouldn't be 1,000, it would be more close to 700, but if you think about that number of students, that's the sort of level of investment that's required.
Okay.
Does that answer your question?
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Could I just
one more, Gordon?
On the private accommodation, I'm aware of the significant investment there is in it, and I think it's to be welcome. How does the students pay for that? Is that partially subsidised, obviously the rent they pay, or for their accommodation? Is that subsidised by the university at all, or is that solely the responsibility of the students and their parents, probably?
If I understand your question correctly, you're asking who pays for accommodation
Yeah.
for students? Well, the students pay for accommodation.
Totally.
So obviously we have a number of beds, and we run those as a going concern, but they're beneficial, I suspect, to the students. But there's a market rate for residency outside of the university. We have no control over that. We don't subsidise it. That said, we also have hardship funds for students. So for those students that have challenges, whether those are family, financial or otherwise, single parents, etc., we provide specific support to enable them to access education. And that's reflected in the number of, as Alistair has indicated, the number that we draw from each of those socio-economic groups.
Yeah, so the new accommodation, I think, is obviously to be welcomed. It's high standard. You know, it's putting an end to where students had to go and live in damp, substandard conditions for years. Now that we've got purpose-built accommodation, I think that's terrific. But the cost, is any of those costs going to be prohibitive in relation to students, the availability to students?
I think market rates is what applies in this, and market demand. If they go outside of what's feasible for students, they simply won't be able to fill them. And so I'm quite confident, without knowing any of the providers, that they will be pitching it in a way that will ensure that they get the business, if you will. But there is a broad context. There's the National Union of Students across the United Kingdom provide breakdowns of costs of living in each of the areas, etc. So there's comparators to sit in there which will allow students to make informed decisions.
Can I, Chair, just add a comment to that? What we find, and this is common with Queen's as well, it's the top-end provision. The ensuite, the best provision, is the first to go. We find that across all our campuses, that top end is the first to go. And I think it points to the reality that students now, they have to pay fees, they have to pay, they're much more aware of the costs, and therefore they want a quality accommodation to enable them to get their degree and get outside and start working. And that's what we find. I think it's fairly common across the providers.
Okay, thanks, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much for that. You suggested you give us some figures in relation to McGee expansion. That would be helpful, and perhaps the action plan in relation to the student issues, the Holy Lands. It might be valuable for the committee just to see that action plan as well.
Certainly, Chair.
And again, I'll just close off, if we're coming to the end, by reiterating our invitation to any of our campuses. I think we've got investments going on in all of them. I think there's a £6 million sports facility at Coleraine going up at the moment, but we've just last September had 2 investments of what I consider to be spectacular facilities on the Coleraine campus. Similarly in McGee. So if the committee would like to visit any of them, we'd be more than delighted to host you. And it's certainly worth seeing some of the building work that's going on in Belfast as well. That's if nothing else, it's 7 stories high, and you get a good view of Belfast.
Thank you very much. Well, we will be the committee will be travelling on a regular basis, so we will certainly bear that in mind. And of course, individual members, I'm sure, can make arrangements to go along and see some of these things themselves. Okay. Thank you very much, Mark.
Thank you.
Thank you, colleagues.
Go backwards.
You're never off the record in here. They're on all the time.
Thank you.
It's Jim fine.
That's it.
Stephen, are you still the Minister?
No, at all.
Okay. Is poacher turned gamekeeper now?
All turned.
Okay.
I always cleared the business case, it just came a bit too late.
Thanks very much. We'll move on quickly because we have items to deal with, and we have a lunch engagement coming up as well. The Matters Horizon, its index is at page 99 of the pack. The Department's response to the legacy report of the ETA Committee and the draft programme for government is page 100. The Department's response to the Energy Wise scheme consultations at page 102, and the Department's response to the career strategy is at page 105. The Energy Wise scheme consultation ran the 10th of June. It finished just recently. The Department's indicated that summary responses will be provided us when they're available. We have reserved the position to be a super consultee in some of these issues, so we will get a summary of the the consultation responses to that. In relation to the electricity market reform, contracts for difference, DEC, the department in London, has announced that onshore wind will not be included in the CFD allocation round in 2016. It seems unlikely that onshore wind will be included in future CFD allocation rounds. Against this backdrop, the Executive will be asked to consider Northern Ireland's participation in the CFD scheme later in 2016. So I presume we'll be asking the department to keep us appraised of their approach to that. The department will provide an update on the outcome of the internal.
Sure. Issue with the contracts for difference, announcing that onshore wind will not be included in the CFD allocation round. I think probably looking at what's happening in the sort of the whole mix of the renewable sectors as well, so the committee might need to take some more information on that and look to have some more information on the whole issue of contracts for difference, because it could have a significant implication on the Northern Ireland onshore energy business and particularly on the supply chain. So we need to be fully aware of that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, as kind of a wrap up to the old DETI committee, there was certainly an understanding this was the direction of travel that DEC were going in, and that we would need to not only tidy up the closure of these things, which is part of what the officials are here to talk to us about, but also the department would very quickly need to turn its mind to what and give a very clear signal to the industry of what will be coming in the future, because you do have not just the people involved in that, but the supply chains as well.
Considerably.
I think when we get back in early September, we'll be requiring some sort of a briefing from the department on where that's sitting. The department will provide an update on the outcome of the internal audit and report on the non-domestic renewable heat incentive scheme once completed. It's a similar issue, again, which has been now brought to a close, and we want to see where all of this is going in terms of renewables. The department's priority over the coming months is to deal with governance, budget and audit issues now that both schemes are closed, and this will include completing a detailed evaluation of the RHI schemes, which will inform long-term policy options. And I mean, there are obviously financial implications ongoing from that RHI scheme as well for the Executive. In relation to the Strategic Energy Framework, the Department hopes to issue a public consultation on the review and refresh later this year. A refocused energy strategy will then be published as soon as practical thereafter, covering the 2016 to 2020 time frame. So those are the suggested actions on the Matters Horizon Index. I don't doubt that we will be wanting to talk to the Department. There's an overlap in a number of those which falls under the general umbrella of renewables, to see where the department are going. We obviously, as I say, in the old committee, it was to get these issues closed in a way which didn't do further damage and to people involved in the industry as well as the budgets, and also then to quickly turn our attention to what's coming down the track, because there are targets, even though the Executive are in targets in terms of the renewable contributions to energy, but those targets will have to continue to be met. So that means there has to be more programmes put in place and a new strategy put in place, and we want to hear from the department early in the autumn in relation to where that's going. Supplementary consultation papers on the Narrow closure at page 11 of the table papers, and we'll be coming on to this issue now, and the department's response in relation to the closure of Narrow and other energy issues is page 33 of the tabled papers. The department's response in relation to the legacy report of the Committee for Employment and Learning is at page 35 of the tabled papers, and the department's response in relation to the youth training is at page 41 of the tabled papers. So I'd now like to move to agenda item 14. We have the officials here to deal with the issue of the closure of the Narrow. Just for members' information, this is to deal with both the SL1 and the SR, the Renewable Obligation Closure Order, Northern Ireland 2016, number 2. There have been, just by way of background, there have been over 120 responses to the policy consultation, and the overwhelming majority of those expressed a preference that supported option 1, which was to close the scheme on the 30th of June. The Secretary of State for Environment and Climate Change has consistently stated that should the North not close the Narrow in line with the policy approach that they have adopted, the additional costs would not be socialised across here in Britain, and that she would legislate through the Energy Bill to protect customers in Britain. The Energy Bill, now the Energy Act, received royal assent on the 12th of May, and that includes a backstop power that, if enacted, would restrict the tradability of the Narrows from here in Britain. And this would benefit no one, and the risk of DEC exercising this power increases the longer the Narrow remains open. Again, I'm and I know people are unhappy at how this has been put into the committee at this stage. I suppose for those of us who were on the old Deputy Committee, we have been through quite a lot of these. There has been debate in the Assembly in probably March, April time, and statements, and the Minister was in front of the committee at that stage to talk through all of this. But nonetheless, this is coming to us now. The Minister decided, therefore, an Arrow should close to new small-scale onshore wind as soon as possible, and he considers this is broadly equivalent to the closure arrangements of Britain, and will be writing to Secretary Rudd, asking her to confirm that under these circumstances the backstop power will not be enacted. I presume that the Department officials have been in touch on a regular basis and liaising with the officials in DEC as to how your approach will play out with their threat to the NIROCs and the tradability of them. The following papers apply. The note from the Department regarding the Minister's decision and request that the Committee expedites the process of approving the SL1 and the SR. The SL itself, the SR itself, the explanatory and financial memorandum for the SR, and the Department's response to the consultation. The Committee, as people will know, we had a brief discussion on this earlier, hasn't had the opportunity to discuss the SL1 or the draft rule, and the reason that both have been brought to today's meeting is the Minister made a special request to the Committee to consider both together in order for the rule to be affirmed before the summer recess, and you have next Monday or Tuesday to do that. I accept that people are in the Committee are annoyed at this kind of truncating of that process of dealing with this. The Minister did contact me as the Chair yesterday evening to ask to offer his explanation for it, and asked if we would take this in view of the urgency of dealing with the situation and the potential consequences of the other side of that, and the fact that certainly in the public sense and part of consultation and in the Assembly, if not in a new mandate, and I accept that fully, there are people here who are just newly on to this committee and newly into the Assembly itself. This has been well urged in the last number of months in the previous mandate. I was content to put it to members to accept whether or not to accept dealing with this issue in the way proposed. I have to say, that said, this is not the way this committee does business. It's not the way this committee intends to do business going forward, and we do intend to have our remit respected by the Department. I understand the pressures in relation to this, the fact that we're into a new mandate, a new Minister, and then a closing date coming quickly at the other side of that. But nonetheless, there still could have been, I think, this paper could have been with us a week or two ago, and I just want to put it on record, and I'd ask you to, I did say this to the Minister last night, that there will be an annoyance at the quickness of this arriving with us and the urgency to deal with it, but I want to just put that on record on behalf of the committee, that we're not satisfied and we don't intend to do business in this fashion going forward. If we do intend to have the proper notification, proper supply of papers and the proper ability of the committee on behalf of both the Assembly and the public to do our scrutiny function in relation to these matters. So that said, we have in front of us with Chris Stewart, the Deputy Secretary of Operational Policy, Infrastructure and Regulation, Alison Clydesdale, Energy Renewables Division, Michael Blower from the Department, and Alan Smith from the Department as well. So you're very welcome, and if you could just give us some opening remarks in relation to that, and the committee then will be able to deal with this or not, as the case may be.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, members. Chair, could I begin by acknowledging the concerns that you have raised on behalf of members, and by thanking you and the members for agreeing to consider the SL1 and SR at such incredibly short notice. We are very appreciative of that. I absolutely accept, Chair, the point that you have made, understand members' concern and frustration at the way that this is being done, and do offer an apology to you that we've ended up in this position. You're absolutely right. This is not the way that the committee needs to perform its very important role, and I would want to assure you that this is not something that we would intend to make a practice of in the future. It's not a request that the Minister put lightly in any way, and would want to assure you no disrespect is intended to the committee, but the Minister only made such a request because he feels this is a matter of the utmost importance, that it's very important to do our level best to try and get this through before summer recess, in order to provide the certainty that the renewable sector is looking for. So, Chair, with that inauspicious start, today we're asking you to consider, as you've said, the SL1 and SR for the closure of Narrow to new small-scale wind projects. that is wind turbines up to 5 megawatts in capacity. The committee will be aware, you've alluded to it, Chair, the Department has been working with DEC during the last mandate and into this one on onshore wind closure. And whilst renewable energy in Northern Ireland is a devolved matter, it's very clear from the discussions with DEC that if we were to maintain a different policy on narrow closure, then there could be very serious implications indeed, both for consumers and for the renewables industry. So this is the last step, if the Committee and the Assembly agree to it, in closing the narrow. And our desired outcome is to be able to demonstrate to DEC that we are closing broadly in line with GB policy. Closure by 30th of June, if we can manage it, offers the greatest chance of ensuring that there will continue to be socialisation of costs across the entire UK consumer base, and the least risk in relation to DEC legislating in the way that you referred to protect GB consumers by restricting the sale of Northern Ireland ROCs. It's also very important that we ensure that narrow ends in a managed way, and one that strikes a balance between two important matters. Firstly, to support the investments already made or committed, along with the associated economic benefit. And secondly, to protect the interests of consumers, both domestic and non-domestic, by making the most of the preferential rate that Northern Ireland enjoys under the narrow. As you said, Chair, there was a 6-week consultation on proposals for closure. It was issued on the 24th of March, closed on the 9th of May. The document set out 3 options: closure on 30th of June, closure on 30th of September, or closure on the 31st of March 2017. There was a healthy level of response, with 120 replies received. Over 93% of the responses supported option 1, closing in June 2016. And I should say, Chairman, that is being reinforced by the frequent contact that we have with stakeholders, particularly in the small-scale sector, who are crying out for certainty and encouraging us to make an early decision on this. Against that background, in order to give that certainty to investors and secure the most megawatts at least cost to the Northern Ireland consumer, the Minister is strongly minded to take forward the closure to onshore wind as proposed in the consultation, that is, by the 30th of June, if Assembly timelines permit. Looking at the GB position in relation to that, the DEC Secretary of State's insistence on early closure to wind across the UK, coupled with her decision to potentially legislate to protect GB consumers should Northern Ireland not close on a broadly equivalent terms, carries a very significant risk to the NIROC market. And it is for that reason that the Minister is minded to move as quickly as possible to close the narrow in order to minimise the chance of such legislation being operationalised by DEC. In light of the consultation responses, the Minister is writing to DEC Secretary of State to seek her assurance in that matter. He will be making clear his clear demonstration of the intent to close narrow as quickly as possible, and hopes that will remove once and for all the threat to DEC legislating to restrict the sale of Northern Ireland ROCs. Turning to the SL1, Chair, it proposes, as I've said, closure to all new small-scale wind proposals from the 30th of June 2016. As in GB, there are exceptions to closure in the form of grace periods, and these are necessary in order to take account of delays that would be no fault of the developer. In this case, projects which meet the eligibility criteria of having planning, grid connection and land rights in place by the 30th of September 2015 will have until 2017 to connect or qualify for further grace periods. Taking all of that together, that could mean in some cases a cumulative period of up to March 2019 to accredit. The grace periods for small-scale wind projects fall into 2 broad categories. Firstly, there's a 12-month grace period for grid and radar delays. Secondly, that one members will probably be quite familiar with. Secondly, perhaps less familiar, there's a 12-month investment freeze grace period. That's for projects that can demonstrate that they would not reach financial close because of the uncertainty with the legislation not being in place. That's something where we've worked hard to meet the concerns of the small-scale sector and to stay in line with similar grace period arrangements in GB. These are the same as the eligibility and grace period conditions that are already in place for large-scale wind closure. In conclusion, Chair, on that basis, the SL1 and the SR would achieve the aim of demonstrating a very clear intent to close the narrow broadly on equivalent terms to GB, and the Minister seeks the Committee's support to move forward on that basis. We just want to emphasise again, Chair, our contrition. We do absolutely recognise we have presented the committee with an unreasonable request at such short notice. We're entirely reliant on your goodwill, but we hope that the committee will agree with the member, with the Minister, that the overriding importance of this issue, I think, necessitates the rather unorthodox approach that we've taken.
Okay, thank you for that. Just a question, and then you say that the Minister is going to write to the Secretary of State. I am assuming, I'm not sure how much you can put on the record, but I'm assuming there has been ongoing liaison to make sure that you're not going to receive a negative response to if this move is approved to close the Narrow by the 30th of June, that is in fact going to do. And I understand, and for people's information, the decision taken in relation to this was taken in the department in London without much reference to here, which left us in a position where people were scrambling to catch up. Having said that, it wasn't terribly well dealt with either, but it did. The initial problem arose because of a kind of an arbitrary decision taken by the department DEC in London. So I'm assuming that the steps that have been outlined here will do the trick as far as they're concerned, and we won't find ourselves in a position where we end up with a negative response. And secondly, I mean, I'm sure you caught it before you came up to the table. We are interested, and the committee will be interested in finding out where the department's going on the other side of tidying up the closure of these schemes, where it's going, and issues like grid connection, which are one of the factors which arose in terms of the ability of people to get the schemes up and going. I think we'll want to be hearing from the department about their liaison with the electricity companies and providers in relation to that, because that was a significant problem for people, as much and maybe more so than planning and other issues. So if we are going to get schemes up and running again, there are a number of ongoing problems which the department, I think, will have to be working on in the time ahead. But that's something I think we'll want to come back to in the early autumn. Your liaison with the department in London, are we fairly certain that what's proposed here will head off any potentially disastrous consequences?
We're as confident as we can be, Chair, and I wouldn't want that to sound mealy-mouthed. We're very confident. I mean, if DEC officials were here today, they'd give you the formal answer that, of course, this is a decision for their Minister to take in due course. But we have been in frequent contact with them. They're very familiar with what we're intending to do. We'll follow up on that later today on foot of this meeting. And I'm confident that if we are able to proceed with this proposal, that the threat will not be taken forward. And the industry will have the certainty that it's looking for, not just those who are looking to take forward projects now, but those who already have ROC agreements, which would be potentially destabilised and devalued if the threat were taken forward. On your second point, yes, you're absolutely right. We heard Mr. Aiken's remarks as we were coming in. Members will understand we've been preoccupied up to now with trying to get Narrow closed. Once we get Narrow closed, then yes, the very next thing I think on the Minister's agenda will be a decision around what's known as electricity market reform, the capacity mechanism currently operating in GB, and there's a decision to be taken as to whether or not Northern Ireland would seek to join that. I think, as we've said certainly to members of the previous committee, it's a difficult decision, one the Minister will want to think very carefully on. But the picture that is being painted of EMR is that if we were to join it, then we know that the costs for Northern Ireland consumers would increase very significantly, perhaps threefold. The benefits, by contrast, would look very uncertain, and given that the decision that has been taken not to include significant support for onshore wind in that, it would look at this stage as if the benefits could be negligible to Northern Ireland, but very significant costs. The Minister will make his decision on that, and depending on what that is, then yes, I think we need to move quickly to develop, engage with the committee and set out very clearly for the industry what our proposals are going forward for what comes after Narrow, as you said. The targets are still there, the need to secure what we already have and to make further progress on decarbonisation is still there, and we need to move into a next major phase of policy on that.
And can we ensure that issues like grid connection problems are worked on in the meantime, so that
yes.
whatever new schemes are agreed or whatever new approach is agreed, that it's not held up by external circumstances?
Absolutely, and we'd be happy to come back and address that issue specifically, Chair. We perhaps look to bring NIE and Sony colleagues, perhaps the regulator as well, with us on that point. But you're absolutely right. An unintended consequence of Nairo is that the grid is very heavily saturated. Until or unless we're able to invest sufficient in grid capacity to deal with that, then that will remain a very significant constraint on any renewables policy going forward.
Okay, thank you. Gordon Dunn.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks very much, Chris. You make reference about the restrictions that would be on the tradability of the Nairos generated here in Northern Ireland. What is the risk there? How do you see that risk if we were to not accept this proposal today?
I think the DEC Secretary of State has made it very clear that if we do not satisfy her that we are closing broadly in line with GB policy, I mean, she accepts that there are certain structural differences in Northern Ireland that have to be taken into account, then she will operationalise that legislation. The legislation, the primary legislation, is already there. It's in the Energy Act. To put it into operation, I think we need some subordinate legislation by DEC, but I mean they could do that fairly quickly and fairly readily. What it would mean is that it would restrict the tradability of Northern Ireland rocks that are, to coin a phrase, not compliant with GB policy. Now, you might look at that and think, oh, well, that is perhaps a very small risk. There would only be a small number of rocks that wouldn't comply and that would therefore be restricted. But our concern is that the risk could actually be very much greater than that the rock market might somehow regard all Northern Ireland rocks as being tainted, and they would simply avoid Northern Ireland rocks. And that may mean that projects that are well established, have been up and running for years, and are predicated on their 20-year income stream from rock payments, would suddenly find their financial viability undermined through no fault of their own, through an unintended consequence of something that they thought really wouldn't affect them. So can we quantify the risk? Absolutely. At this stage, no, we can't. But at its worst, I think that risk is potentially very, very serious indeed for the Northern Ireland renewables industry. And I think that is what lies behind the views that are being expressed in consultation, I'm sure directly to members from right across the industry. As you know, industry hasn't always seen eye to eye with us on this. Stakeholders such as the Ulster Farmers Union haven't always seen eye to eye on this. But I think very much with that threat in mind, they're all saying very, very clearly to us, they're very, very worried by it. They want certainty, they want Nairo closed as quickly as possible, and they want that threat removed.
Okay, and the effect of losing socialisation, the major consequences for all consumers in Northern Ireland?
It would be, Alison, you might want to say a little bit more about that. I'm not sure whether we can put a figure on what that would actually mean for bills. I mean, we think the greater concern is what would happen to the rock market as opposed to what would happen to bills. But nevertheless, the intention behind it, as the DEC Secretary of State has made clear, is to protect GB consumers. So, I mean, there would be some outworking, I think, to bills.
Initially, Chair, it is the case that members within the committee, the old DETI committee, we explored the options of the possibility of extending the dates and looking at other funding through the executive and so on, but it wasn't financially viable at the end of the day. Would that be fair to say?
Well, it would be a cost to consumers, if the Minister decided to provide some additional support if the Nairo closed. Socialisation has been preserved for the large scale because the large scale closure order has demonstrated to the Secretary of State that we have closed, and so for the majority of the pipeline, socialisation of cost is there. If these costs weren't to be socialised, then there would be a question mark as to how those costs would then be met, if they would be met at all. But the much bigger impact is the potential of the NIROCs and the falling away of the market. We can't predict with certainty, but we think one of the effects might be a fall in the value of NIROCs. So that would affect not only new projects coming on and their viability, it would potentially affect the viability of well-established projects as well, and also projects, non-wind projects as well. It wouldn't necessarily be just wind in this case. It is really that tainting effect that is the bigger risk.
I think the loss of socialisation is potentially very, very serious no matter what we do going forward, and I think it's a factor in the decision around EMR. To try and do anything purely within Northern Ireland, our consumer base is already at 150,000 compared with the UK-wide consumer base of many millions. So if we try to do anything on a go-it-alone basis here, I think you immediately run into an affordability constraint.
Okay, thanks very much. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, thank you. And thanks for that information then. Members have heard the advice and the presentation from the officials from the department. I just ask, I know people have expressed some reservations in relation to it. Are we content to move on to consider the SL1 and the SLR?
Agreed.
Agreed. Okay. The draft rule is subject to affirmative resolution. That means the statutory rule will be laid before the Assembly in draft form for a specified period, and then must be affirmed by a motion proposing this brought by the Minister within the specified period is next week. The committee will deal with the SL1 first to ensure that our procedural rules are followed, even though we were dealing with them on the same day. The proposed rule, which is intended to come into operation on the day after in which it's made, will close the Northern Ireland Renewables obligation to small-scale onshore wind generation, i.e. up to 5 megawatts installed capacity on the 30th of June 2016, and will introduce exceptions to closure in the form of defined grace periods. And Chris has already outlined some of those exceptions. This is the committee's opportunity to consider the policy as set out in the SL1. Are the members content with the policy implications of the proposed legislation?
Agreed.
Okay, fair enough. We'll note that. We'll move on to deal with statutory rule. The statutory rule has not yet, the examiner of statutory rules has not yet reported on this rule, so members will be agreeing to legislation subject to the examiner of statutory rules report. The Minister will seek the Speaker's permission to bring a motion seeking affirmation of the draft rule on Monday's plenary session. Are members content with the draft rule?
Agreed.
Okay, we note that, Sinead. The question then, pardon me.
I would stand in that one as well.
Oh, well, you can.
Yes, sir.
Fair enough. The question then that we put is that the Committee for the Economy has considered the renewable obligation closure number 2 order Northern Ireland 2016 and subject to the examiner statutory rules report recommends that it be affirmed by the Assembly. That's agreed with 2 abstentions, I presume. Or
agreed.
Thank you. Okay, that's done. Thank you very much. And I trust that you'll reflect to the Minister the general concerns in relation to the
certainly will, Chair.
Sorry, just before you go, Chris, has the Speaker agreed to the agenda item going on Monday?
Not as yet, Chair, no.
Not as yet.
Through the Chair, when will we know that?
I would hope to know this afternoon.
The order papers normally go out on Thursday.
But I mean, we're in the Speaker's hands on this one. I mean, it is a very irregular situation with the Business Committee having met yesterday.
Yeah, I was thinking that.
There wouldn't be, without the Speaker's indulgence, there isn't actually a formal opportunity for the Business Committee to consider that, I think, unless the Speaker decides to reconvene the Business Committee.
He may well do I was going to say a whip around, but he might do a run around.
We are in his hands on this matter.
Okay, fair enough. He also obviously understands that this is the last opportunity. Fair enough. Thank you. Thanks, members. We'll go back to agenda item 8.
Apologies, Chair. I have to step out for about 40 minutes. I'll be back. Thanks.
We'll go back to agenda item 8 and we'll try and run through the rest of this because we, as I say, we have a lunch engagement coming up. The written briefing by the Department on the Broadband Improvement Project and Superfast Rollout Programme Phase 2. It's in page 171 of the pack. And just to say, this is obviously was debated, I think, on Tuesday, was it yesterday? Yes. Both in a general motion, I think, from Sinead and members of the SDLP, and then there was an adjournment debate specifically in relation to West Tyrone, which I suppose most, if not all, rural areas could have the same debate. I mean, we could all be, and there is concern. So there is a briefing to note, and if members are content to note the briefing, I think it is worthwhile early in the autumn to get the relevant officials in to get a proper briefing, which we then can use this paper and have an interrogation of this. Okay, thank you. Agenda item 9 is a written briefing by the Department Insolvency Service Consultation. The correspondence from the Minister is page 177, consultation debt relief package at page 182, and the consultation petition for bankruptcy at page 190. The Department has provided a copy of the consultation responses in relation to the 2 proposals. Do you want to add anything to that, Peter?
Chair, it's fairly relatively straightforward, and the consultations have been broadly in favour. There were some highlighted differences. If I just give members a bit of a flavour, in terms of increasing the upper 2 limits for the entry criteria for the debt relief scheme, the Department believes that in relation to proposed increases to the limits on the debt and value of property, for eligibility for a debt relief scheme, that these should be respectively increased to 20,000 and 1,000 as planned. They're basically saying that this is a much more sensible level. It's also a level that's mirrored in other jurisdictions, and it would therefore give parity of this kind of action or scheme right across all local jurisdictions. The second, to raise the threshold level of debt above which it's possible to petition to have a debtor made bankrupt. The Minister's suggesting this is raised to 5,000, which is the same as what happens in England and Wales. Land and Property Services have suggested 3,000 is a more appropriate figure. The way they base that on is they say £5,000 would effectively be 6 years of an annual averaged rates bill. And what would mean is if it was a 6-year period before they could get an ability to retrieve the debt, they would lose the first year because you can only retrieve debt for the 5 years. So they're suggesting that a lower threshold would mean they would have a lot less likelihood of being unable to retrieve the first year of debt. The Minister has considered that but believes the 5,000 level is more appropriate, and that has been the general sort of flow of the consultation itself. It's really down to members to decide whether or not they're content with those levels of debt relief that have been put in place. But what we do is if we note it now, the SL1 will come along in due course.
So it'll come back to us for a decision at a later date. We're only really noting the consultation.
So this is really just note about that, but it is maybe worth members just having a read through the consultations and reflecting on those figures, because as I say, Land and Property Services have queried the 5,000 figure. They're suggesting 3. The Minister is minded towards 5.
Could we ask whenever we're getting the SL1 if we get some indication as to what the different impact may be on debtors? You know, is the lesser more punitive, or that's what strikes me, but I don't know.
Yeah, okay, we can ask for that. That's fine. Okay, so are members content to note the consultation? Obviously, it comes back for further discussion and consideration when the SL1 comes to us. Item 10 is the annual report on public bodies and appointments. We deferred this from last week. I don't know that we're going to get the time today to give it the sort of consideration it needs, but there are a couple of options with this. We can note it and let it go. We could write to the First and Deputy First Minister and ask them what action they intend to take in regard to this generally. We could deal with the arm's length bodies or quangos in this that relate specifically to the Department's remit, and perhaps ask the Minister, has he any ideas about what's he going to do in relation to that, or perhaps even refer to the Executive Office Committee. Is that what the new committee is called?
Yes, Executive
Office Committee, and ask, because they have that overarching view, because this is across all of the departments. There are a number of these that apply to the Department for the Economy. I think we have some generalised points in relation to them that people were making. So I'm quite easy, or we can park this and come back to it when people feel we have a fuller opportunity to discuss it.
Chair, it was sent to all the committees from the Executive Office Committee, so they were obviously looking for possibly some kind of input or some kind of suggestion. So the options you've outlined would allow the committee to give some indication of its feelings, possibly writing to the First and Deputy First Minister to ask if they're doing any kind of systemic review of the arm's length bodies, NDPBs and so on, or whether you do want to refine it down to just the Minister and the bodies that are within the remit of the Department of the Economy.
Alex, yeah.
I think, if I were just to write back to Executive and ask them what they do, and it's like bouncing the ball back again, so I do think that we should have a look at on a constructively critical basis of a lot of these bodies, because we heard here that the kind of non-government bodies here expend half of our budget, and that's an awful amount of public money, and a lot of that is actually then dispersed by people who are not really accountable. And when people keep talking about there's too many MLAs, there's too many councillors, well, there's far too many people in Quangles in my view. Over 2,000 people, a lot of them not really accountable at all, spending a lot of public money for which we as elected representatives will take the flak if it's not spent in the way in which the public want it. So I just do think we should start to have a critical examination of all of this, because I just think it's something which was all evolved throughout many years of direct rule. We don't have direct rule at the minute now, so I think we should start to examine what the department. In other words, I believe there should be a rationale for the retention of anybody, any such bodies out there.
Okay, Stephen.
Thanks, Chair. Just a number of points. First of all, even because this is a report into the public appointments process in the narrow sense about appointments. It's not a report into the deliberation otherwise of arm's length bodies. I suppose I should declare an interest in proper scrutinising some of the decisions I took. But there is some work ongoing in this regard. You have a report from the current Commissioner in terms of how things should change. There's issues there in terms of how legal some of the changes are in terms of employment and equality law. There has been a response from the outgoing OFM, DFM to other departments around what they're encouraged to do in terms of appointments, and probably the Executive Committee is probably best placed to engage in that in a more detail around the overarching issues. In terms of the wider issue over the arm's length bodies, I would stress that we need to be conscious that there is a divide between what is the policy making role of departments and delivery, which is often done through our arm's length bodies. There's two parallel discussions here. One is whether we can consolidate some arm's length bodies together. The second issue is whether we bring arm's length bodies functions back into the core of departments. In my sort of experience, I would caution against that. Civil servants are very, very good at policy making. In terms of delivery, they're not as good, and so there's arguments for keeping things out of departments, but there's issues then about the governance structures around accountability and how many, which are all perfectly legitimate debates. But in terms of this particular remit, unless there's some particular concerns over either the DETI or DEL approach, it's probably one where you should probably just refer this back to the Executive Office and ask them, are they going to do any further work in terms of examining the nature and the approaches taken towards public appointments around things like, obviously, things like gender balance are very... The
Executive Office Committee, are you talking about?
Yes.
Yeah, because I think you're correct, this is specifically about appointments and not about the role and functions of these, although in my own view, you know, a lot of these are the children of a direct rule period when there was an attempt to create some broader democratic or undemocratic, as the case may be, input into decision making, and whether they're appropriate in a period of sustained period of devolution then is a bigger political question. So I suppose the options for us is we could kick this back to the Executive Office Committee and say we have concerns in relation to the appointments, and that's a broader reflection in relation to arm's length bodies in general, and we think you as a committee with the overarching responsibility should be conducting some work into it, and perhaps see what they say to that. If they're not maybe stepping up, we can conduct our own look at the arm's length bodies which fall under the remit of this committee. People content with that in the first instance, that we go back to them and say we do share, because they've asked us for our view, and I suppose at the very least we could say members have raised concerns about both the appointments process and the outworking of all of that, the gender balance, all of that in relation to the appointments process, but we have broader concerns in relation to arm's length bodies and their responsibility, which we could get some information to the committee. Is that their thinking? Are they intend to do any work on it? If not, then it may come back to us to look at the specific bodies which fall under our remit. So are members content that we would do that in the first instance to see what their intention? They obviously have some idea in relation to looking at this when they've fired it out to all of the other committees for review. Just maybe Peter could talk to the clerk just to reflect their own general sense of these things.
As an aside to that, Chair, you could either write back to the department and either ask for an evidence session, or perhaps in the first instance a written response which would set out the current policies of the department around how they, for example, advertise. There's issues where I can't recall who's more proactive than others, but how active people are on Twitter, Facebook, as opposed to the more conventional means by which these are advertised, what sort of affirmative action approaches are taken to try to encourage applications from underrepresented sections. So in the short run, we could actually ask the department for their current update on the current policy of the department and practice.
Okay, are members content to do that?
Yeah.
Agreed. Fair enough. That's two bits of correspondence, one to the committee, one to the department. Thank you. Item 11, correspondence. There's a couple of pieces of correspondence. Just ask maybe Peter to bring you through those.
Chair, we have a number here. We've got one from the National Energy Action, who are responding to the Energy Wise consultation. Members will already be aware from what the Chair had said before that we will be waiting until we get a summary of responses on the Energy Wise consultation before the committee makes any decisions or intervenes there. So what I would suggest is we hold that response from the National Energy Action to that point where we're looking at those other responses if members are content to do that. It starts at page 454 in the committee pack. So if your members are content, we hold that until we look at this as a broader issue.
And to proceed the full summary of consultations. Okay, that's it as far as correspondence is concerned.
If I just very quickly go through the correspondence index at page 35 of the tabled pack. I appreciate, members, it's not that easy to flick between the two, but I'll just go very quickly through the summary there. We've had an interesting letter from the Campaign for Real Ale around the licensing laws in Northern Ireland. Northern Ireland has 27 breweries that are producing real ale. Part of the issue for them is that they cannot sell direct from their premises. Their licensing doesn't allow them to do that. Therefore, they have to find other arrangements which are not necessarily easy for them with the very limited production run they make. They can't sell to the big supermarkets because they don't supply enough, and they can't necessarily get arrangements with the chains who own the public houses. So they're flagging up this as an issue. It's not necessarily one for this committee, but it might be worthwhile hearing informally from Camera, as this is the year of food and drink, and the committee is going to be doing a showcase later on in the year about that. I'm suggesting perhaps, Chair, if there's an informal meeting with yourself and the Deputy Chair to see what the issues are.
The Minister for Communities is currently looking at licensing, isn't it? Yeah. So it's probably opportune that if we do have any opinions on it in relation to their specific, that we... Okay, our members agree that we just have an informal...
Then there's another one from the Scottish and Northern Ireland Plumbing Employers Federation. This is the impact to pension schemes that they have running. Now, it's, again, not specifically a DFE issue, but what they're talking about is if the pension rules change and they find themselves significantly more liable for gaps in pension, that it will impact on businesses themselves. That's where this committee's role comes in. But again, it might be worthwhile having an informal meeting with them just to try and pin down their issues, and then perhaps report those on to communities as well.
Okay, are members content?
Great.
Then we've had a request from St Mary's University College. They've written a letter just giving a bit of background about themselves and the review of initial teacher education and infrastructure. And they're inviting the committee to hold an external meeting there. Chair, what we thought, and I'll be looking to Mr Gramaski about this, is whether we can do it possibly as part of our West Belfast Day, possibly even have a meeting at the college as part of a sort of day of visits or whatever as well, if members are content, we can look at that.
Planning that schedule.
Very quickly, Construction Industry Training Board have written, members recall we looked at their levy the other week. They are talking about challenges faced by the construction industry, which is an ongoing issue that we're looking at. And they want the committee to bear in mind what they do and the levy they apply when looking at the apprenticeship levy. That's already an issue we flagged up, and we will bring them in to talk to them about that if members are content. And then just a letter from Alistair Hamilton, the Chief Executive of Invest, congratulating you on your post as Chair and looking forward to engaging with the committee next week.
Okay, fair enough. We'll just note those, and there'll be further action in due course.
Chair, just on that, we're not going to Invest next week?
No, we can't. We can't get the conference room in their building that we'd hoped for.
We don't have the priority we thought we had.
I think it's put out on a commercial basis. So Tourism and Invest and I will come to us, but we will get a tour around their building at some point.
We're at home.
Back at home.
Good.
Okay, thank you. Item 12, any other business? I haven't been notified of any unless anyone wants to raise anything. No. Item 13, the date. Next Wednesday, we're back in room 29 in Parliament Buildings at 10 a.m. So I'll now adjourn the meeting if we're content. And we have lunch and a bit of a tour.